Z, I don't know how I'm supposed to say it, and British boys and men are more likely to believe that feminism has done more harm than good when compared with older respondents. So the polling also found that a quarter of UK males aged 16 to 29 believe it's harder to be a man than a woman, with 1 in 5 looking favourably upon controversial influencer Andrew Tate. 37% of them also agree that the phrase toxic masculinity is unhelpful. So, with Gen Z boys increasingly holding this view, has feminism done more harm than good? Let me know your thoughts. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, tweet me @gbnews, and make sure you take part in our poll. But I'll bring you those results shortly. Going head-to-head on this tonight are author and commentator Anna May Mangan and YouTuber and social media influencer Pearl Davies. Both of you, thank you very much. Pearl, I'll start with you. Has feminism done more harm than good, especially when it comes to these Gen Z boys?
Yes, it has. Feminism really has turned into a bunch of crybaby women that want to complain that we're not given equal opportunity when really women are given more opportunity than men. And so, yeah, I would say feminism is a hate group and it's a bunch of crybaby women.
Anna, would you like to come back to that? Crybaby women feminism, apparently.
So we've got a right lad with us tonight with Pearl and her opinions, haven't we? How could it possibly do harm? Pearl wouldn't do. I hope you vote. I assume you do. I hope you're not chained to the kitchen sink at home. I'm not sure if you've got a job, so I don't know very much about you, but you're probably, if there's a bloke doing the same thing as you, you're probably earning less than him. So of course feminism is something that it got us the vote in the first place, and it's still doing a power of good. It's just whingy men, and actually I changed that. They're lads, they're not men.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, it's 3 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. On today's show, House of Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle has reiterated his apology for his handling of the Gaza ceasefire debate after last night's chaos. He was accused of helping Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer avoid another damaging revolt over the ceasefire. We'll bring you all the latest on this. Just stop Hoyle. It's also emerged civil servants are demanding a 4-day week for the same pay, and they want extra holiday on top. Can you blooming well believe it? They'll work from home anyway, don't they? I'll be speaking to a Tory MP for his thoughts on this work-shy scandal shortly. And fury has been sparked over plans to house asylum seekers in a small Cumbrian town in the grips of a housing shortage, with 8 properties set to be used to put up around 40 migrants. We'll head there soon for a full inside story. That's all coming up in your next hour. Thank you for joining me on the show today. It's always a pleasure to have your company. Also, I'll be showing you some video from last night. I got involved in the pro-Palestine protest at Parliament Square. I was egged. Political extremism. But I got it all on record. The police simply stood by on multiple occasions and did absolutely nothing to stop the mob as I was assaulted. I'll give you the full exclusive inside story with the video. We cannot give the mob free range. Get in touch all your usual ways, gbviews@gbnews.com. Have you got faith in the police anymore? Were the mob outside Parliament last night controlling what goes on inside? And if we have mob rule, are we on the thin end towards social breakdown and anarchy? All of that coming up, a juicy show ahead. But first, your latest news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Martin, thank you. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Commons Speaker has reiterated his apology over his handling of the Gaza ceasefire debate. Sir Lindsay Hoyle told MPs he has a duty of care, and if his mistake is to look after members, then he is guilty. He's facing calls to resign for allowing a Labour amendment to an SNP motion. More than 60 MPs have now declared no confidence in the Speaker. Sir Keir Starmer also denied threatening him or influencing any decision.
I can categorically tell you that I did not threaten the Speaker in any way whatsoever. I simply urged him to ensure that we have the broadest possible debate.
And your MPs?
Broadest possible debate, so that actually the most important thing, which is what do we do about the awful situation in Gaza, could be properly discussed by MPs with a number of options in front of them. That's the right thing to do. The Speaker did the right thing in making sure the debate was broad.
Commons leader Penny Mordaunt defended Sir Lindsay, describing him as a decent man and blamed Labour for causing chaos in the Commons.
Nothing is more important than the interests of the Labour Party. The Labour Party before principle. The Labour Party before individual rights. The Labour Party before the reputation and honour of the decent man that sits in Speaker's chair. The Labour Party before fairness, integrity and democracy.
SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn told the Speaker his position is now untenable.
It ultimately turned into a Labour opposition day. That, quite frankly, is not acceptable. And as I have expressed to you privately prior to proceedings here today, we do not, on these benches, therefore believe that you can continue in your role as Speaker. We do not have confidence in your ability to do so.
However, Liberal Democrats leader Sir Ed Davey told GB News he believes the Speaker should not resign.
Liberal Democrats have full confidence in Speaker Hoyle. He was in a very difficult position. Gaza has got lots of emotions. It's a very important issue. And to make sure all views were heard, I think he approached that with a degree of gravity, rightly. Plus, he had to consider the issues about MP security and safety, as we've heard. So it was a difficult position, but I think we should respect him.
In other news, the UK and Jordan have airdropped aid to a hospital in northern Gaza in a joint operation. Supplies include essential medicines, fuel and food for patients and staff, with the Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron saying it'll help thousands of people. It's part of an agreement signed by the UK this week to deliver £1 million of aid to Gaza. Households could see their energy bills fall to the lowest level in 2 years. Energy regulator Ofgem is due to announce the latest price cap tomorrow, with experts predicting it'll drop by £293 a year. That would see the average household bill falling by 15%, from just over £1,900 a year to £1,635 from the start of April. Employers could be sued if they don't make reasonable adjustments for menopausal women in the workplace. The Equalities Watchdog has issued guidance to companies to clarify their legal obligations. Symptoms include hot flushes, brain fog and difficulty sleeping, which can be considered a disability under the 2010 Equality Act if it impacts a woman's ability to carry out usual day-to-day activities. Parents who lose a baby before 24 weeks of pregnancy in England can now receive a certificate in recognition of their loss. The scheme is designed to acknowledge the grief of parents who experience this. The new certificates will be official but not legal documents, and they're optional. People in Scotland can already apply to have losses recorded in the Memorial Book of Pregnancy and Baby Loss prior to 24 weeks. All parents affected since September 2018 can apply. And police chiefs are calling for new powers to allow them to instantly ban drink or drug drivers at the side of the road. They say it would allow them to take drivers who pose a risk to others off the road immediately. Currently, drivers charged with drug or drink driving offences are banned following a sentencing hearing in court. But that can take weeks, during which time drivers are allowed to get back behind the wheel. The National Police Chiefs Council for Roads Policing also want tougher punishments for drivers who kill while under the influence, including potential murder charges. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Martin.
Thank you, Tatiana. Now let's get stuck in today's show. And what a day of political drama it was yesterday, with the ramifications rattling on today. And Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is fighting to save his political life as the SNP's Westminster leader, Stephen Flynn, has confirmed his party no longer has confidence in him.
Last evening we saw the best of this House and its ability to debate, and we also saw the worst of this House as it descended into farce. And I think I speak for everyone in the chamber just now, and indeed yesterday, when I expressed my deep sorrow that that was able to happen, given the content of what it was we were debating. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, it descended into farce because of a decision that you made, and you alone made, to ignore the advice that was given to you by the clerks. And as I have expressed to you privately prior to proceedings here today, we do not, on these benches, therefore believe that you can continue in your role as Speaker. We do not have confidence in your ability to do so. So I would therefore welcome clarity, either from yourself or indeed from the Leader of the House, as to how we can best facilitate a vote in this chamber at the earliest possible occasion.
Well, the knives are certainly drawn from the SNP. And meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer has strenuously denied claims that he threatened Sir Lindsay Hoyle to select his party's amendment in the Gaza ceasefire debate so he could avoid a large rebellion of his own, saying he simply urged the Commons Speaker to have the broadest possible debate by putting a number of options in front of MPs. Well, I'm joined now from Westminster Hall live by GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Chris, a huge day yesterday. We watched this build up. This time yesterday, the mob outside seeming to dictate what was going on inside. Believed to be 60 and rising MPs now, Chris, have signed this petition to just stop Hoyle. Can he survive?
Well, the number now is 63, but as you say, rising. We heard there Stephen Flynn, he's the Westminster leader of the SNP. He said his party, the third biggest party in House of Commons, doesn't support Sir Lindsay Hoyle. If you add the other SNP members of that group who haven't signed the EDM, you get towards 79 or 80. Now, I've been told by senior Tory figures, friends of Sir Lindsay Hoyle, who have reluctantly signed this EDM, that they think it could be 100 by Monday. That's 1 in 6 of all MPs in the House of Commons not having confidence, or saying there should be a vote of confidence in whether they support the Speaker of the House of Commons. A complete disaster. It's hard to navigate a way through on this, I think. It seems to me that what could happen, and maybe might have to happen, from talking to Tories, certainly, who are leading the charge here. I mean, all of the officers of the 1922 committee have backed this motion. If Sir Lindsay came out and sat there in the Speaker's chair and said it was Labour who put me in a position where I had to select their amendment, that might be a way of almost rebalancing the ledger, because currently the SNP and the Tories feel that this is a Speaker who isn't going to be a fair dealer with them. He gave Labour a chance last night, a get-out-of-free jail card last night, not to have to vote for the SNP policy on Gaza or the government policy on Gaza. He gave them a third way. He allowed a vote on Labour's motion, and that's what caused the big row, which we discussed yesterday, and where the clerk of the House of Commons stepped in and said this is unusual, but is allowed, but is unusual by the Speaker. It's an utter mess. I certainly didn't see an attempt to remove the Speaker coming this week. I think he was a Speaker who is well liked. He has got the MPs back, particularly on security, but he's walked into an absolute mess here, and I can't see how he gets out of it. He's got to win the SNP round somehow. He can limp on, hobble on for the election, but he's badly wounded.
Chris, to try and give some benefit of the doubt to Sir Lindsay, he mentioned the time when Parliament came under a terrorist attack previously. We all remember those terrible scenes, of course. He said, I have a duty of care that I have to carry out to protect people in Parliament. It is the protection, that instinct, that led me to make a wrong decision. Do you think people will buy that, the fact he was doing this as a humanitarian act, an act of protectionism, or will the prevailing mood be actually he caved to the mob?
And that's where I think your point about the mob outside has resonance in this case, Martin, because I think that this place, we're all vetted to come and work here. We have to go through security if you're visiting here. MPs are meant to be able to debate anything without fear or favour. I mean, even in a House of Commons chamber, you're not meant to mention who's in the gallery above. When MPs vote in the members' lobby, I'm chucked out because I'm not an MP, rightly so. MPs are meant to be able to have a vote. This place is a sanctity of debate. And to suggest, as he did, that the pressure on MPs in their constituencies means that Labour MPs should have a vote is dictating what MPs discuss in the Commons chamber. And that's a point made to me earlier by Sir Geoffrey Cox. He made clear that Britain's enemies will look at that and go, well, if you put some heat on MPs locally, we can change what's debated in the House of Commons, in the mother of all parliaments. And that's the point, I think, that has been missed here so far, that by allowing the pressure of the mob on local people. We saw, didn't we, a Tory MP quitting over fear of his own safety, by allowing pressure on MPs to dictate what the Speaker chooses in the House of Commons, the mob's allowed to win. And that's why I think his defence is weak at the moment and must be strengthened.
Chris, I think you're absolutely bang on the money there, mate. Thank you very much for summing it up so well for us. And, of course, we'll come back to you throughout the show. And I'm joined now in the studio by the director of the New Culture Forum, Peter Whittle. Peter, you got off the mark on this early doors today. Yesterday, we were saying on the show, Gaza has poisoned our streets. Now, has it poisoned the mother of all parliaments?
Well, what's happened is what's been basically a matter of intimidation by Islamism in this country over about the past 20 years has finally reached Parliament, and that's why they're taking it seriously. I mean, I think that when you look at what's happening there, all the shenanigans, which most people will look at home and just be appalled by, the fact is it sort of rather masks what I would see as the real issue, and that is that basically MPs, Labour MPs particularly, and some Tories, are being increasingly intimidated, as Chris said there, I think, not by people outside, but locally, you know, and the general atmosphere is one of intimidation. This is the real issue. The problem is really, Martin, is that the House of Commons has got a record of basically ignoring the real issue. When Sir David Amish was murdered, what happened? The Commons talked about social media, the dangers of social media. Similarly, when Mike Freer stood down because of intimidation, you know, the MP for Finchley, quite recently, I think this speaker said something like, you know, we've all got to be nicer to each other. In other words, totally missing the point. I mean, whether it is a school teacher in Batley going into hiding. He's still in hiding for showing his pupils cartoons of Mohammed, right up to this very week where William Shawcross, who wrote the report about Prevent, you know, the anti-terrorist strategy, said that, in fact, fear of being considered Islamophobic meant that actually it wasn't being effective. This is going through our whole society, as is indeed a form of sectarianism. That is the most worrying thing of all, and it's related to this.
And I think you bang on. And I think people are afraid to call this out. And we also saw this with the grooming gang scandals. And you're right, we're covering the Shawcross report later on in the show. Islamic extremism being allowed to fester and to flourish because we're afraid to call it out. And I was in that crowd yesterday at Parliament. Coming to that a bit later, I was assaulted in that crowd. They were putting up placards early doors of your grandchildren will know how you voted today. And I said to Chris Hope yesterday at that point, they're going to be terrified in there of how they vote. It's a matter of public record, and they've got to go and do their surgeries, be in their constituencies. It's not just the Tory MPs. We've seen Rachel Reeves harassed on the streets, Sir Keir Starmer chased off a train, Angela Rayner harassed on the campaign trail. If you don't stop the mob ends up controlling the country.
Yes, but the problem is that basically, as I said, this has been going on for a very long time. Appeasement does not work. We've just seen a massive piece of appeasement happening.
So what's the answer?
Well, I mean, basically, two things I would say, actually, to that. First of all, Martin, you've got to have, I would say, and you might think it's unrelated, but it's not, a complete halt to any further migration, because that's at the very root of all of this. That you've got to have. And they've got to basically stop appeasing and start, well, not being cowards, because people have been living with this now for a long time in all these different areas of life.
And Peter, new laws are often bandied about, but I was witnessing last night new laws, for example, to remove face masks, were simply not being upheld because there might be the bill, there isn't the will. And if you don't stop this aggro at grassroots level on the streets last night outside Parliament, it just grows and grows and grows and it will take over.
Well, yes, but there's something much more worrying coming down the line, which is when we have a Labour government, which we will probably, they're going to embed in legislation a particular new definition of what's known as Islamophobia, which is so wide that, frankly, it seems that any criticism, actually, of Islam will almost be out of bounds. These things are related. I think that the crucial point about now, really, Martin, is that we must not be waylaid by what is essentially a political argument that's going on between the parties and why one wasn't allowed to have their debate and all of that. What we are seeing is basically the influence that growing sectarianism is having on our political culture and now, obviously, in Parliament too. It's very dangerous.
Peter Whittle, thought-provoking, forthright, excellent as ever. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Superb start to this hour. Now, during a visit to a train depot in Sussex today, Sir Keir Starmer was asked about the claims that he threatened Speaker Sir Lindsay Daul to select Labour's amendment to that Gaza debate. And here's what Sir Keir had to say.
I can categorically tell you that I did not threaten the Speaker in any way whatsoever. I simply urged him to ensure that we have the broadest possible debate.
And your MPs?
Broadest possible debate, so that actually the most important thing, which is what do we do about the awful situation in Gaza, could be properly discussed by MPs with a number of options in front of them. That's the right thing to do. The Speaker did the right thing in making sure the debate was broad.
Well, last night, thousands of pro-Palestine protesters descended on Westminster to put pressure on MPs to support a suspension of fighting in Gaza, and I decided to join them. In fact, that's my way home. Why don't we have a look at how I got on? So, as you can see, I was egged by a young woman who was at the protest, threw 2 eggs at me. One missed my head, one got me. Before that, I'd been showered with liquid. I hope it was water. Who knows what's going on at the moment with Abdul Azidi on the streets. This started when I left work and I saw images being projected onto Big Ben. You can see them on screen there. It said, "Stop bombing Gaza." It said, "From the river to the sea." Pro-Palestine messages being projected onto Big Ben, the Tower of Westminster. This is a criminal offence. I know this because I know the law. There's the projector. I walked over and it's a small implement. Look, it's no bigger than a small motorcycle battery on a tripod, projecting. As you see, I pan over and it's on there. And the world was seeing these shameful messages. This isn't allowed. I know that because I've looked into it in the past. A law was passed in 2016 when anti-Brexit messages were routinely being broadcast onto parliamentary buildings. I told the coppers there, this is an offence. When are you going to go and stop these lads? And they said, oh, somebody else is going to deal with it. Offence number 1, ignored. Here's what a young man has to say to me. The conversation was fascinating.
Blah, 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 blah. Arrest him! Blah, 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 blah. There we go, he comes to brains of Britain. Blah, 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 he's got a full face mask on. Blah, 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 blah.
You would get more sense out of a house brick. I've had better conversations with my cat. But the fact of the matter is, previous to that, a bloke with a ski mask had walked past. I said to a policeman in attendance, last week, mate, laws were passed. £1,000 on-the-spot fine or a month in jail to remove those masks. It's a criminal offence, buttressing laws that were passed, the Public Order Act, in 2015. The policeman did not want to know. The bloke simply walked off. Second offence. Then a bloke walked over the road and showered me with water. As I said, he previously verbally abused me. I can't even show those clips. And then the eggs came. And as you saw, the copper took 2 strides towards that young lady. She didn't even run. She didn't even jog. She walked off. He had no interest whatsoever in nicking her. 2-tier policing on the streets as that mob outside influence what goes on inside Parliament. I think we're losing control of our streets, and I think that's because the police don't give a monkeys. That's just me. Now, you're watching or listening to GB News. Coming up, civil servants are demanding a 4-day working week. And get this, they want it for the same pay plus bonus holiday on top. What planet are they on? I'll speak to Conservative MP Greg Smith for his thoughts next on this. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
When you listen to Nigel Farage's assessment there, do you feel that maybe this is as good as it was going to get, given that we had the pandemic and it was inevitably always going to be a bit of a mixed bag?
Well, I think it's a bit of a poor excuse from Nigel there that they haven't done it properly. The facts are, Nigel, that it's not worked. It's not going to work. Yes, we will rejoin. I mean, are we better off for it? Are they...
Can I jump in there, Charlie? We're going to rejoin under which government? Because Labour aren't going to do that, unless you don't think...
But I mean, it's going to be unavoidable not to join, because I think it's getting worse and worse for us. I mean, let me just say this. Are the NHS better because we're out of Europe? No, they're not, because they're not employing more staff. Is the building trade better off? No. Is travelling abroad or to the EU or staying in the EU, are we better off? No. Are we better off because foods rise because of the EU? No. Are we better off with imports and export? No, because they're taking longer. The overall result is that we're not better off. The killer point here is 57% of the public will now vote to remain. 33% would leave. Surely that's the telling point.
It depends on the pollster, Charlie, because we were talking to a very good pollster earlier who said there's no enthusiasm for any change in a year. Maybe 10 years, they might be thinking about it.
Belinda de Lucia, let's bring you in. I'm sure you want to react to what Charlie said.
I mean, who would have thought that the UK wanting to run its own affairs and making our politicians more accountable would be so revolutionary? EU Parliament voted a majority to get rid of the vetoes, the last remaining scraps of democracy that the EU had. Now, luckily for EU citizens at the moment, you know, it means a treaty change to actually go forward. But that is the mood. The ever closer union. We have dodged a federalised, globalist, international, power-gobbling, anti-democratic organisation, and that's worth more than a few trade and travel perks for a few wealthy people in this country.
Hear, hear. Belinda de Lucia, Charlie Mullins, great to see you both.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 3:26. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, time is running out on your chance to win 18 grand in cold hard cash in our latest Great British giveaway as lines close this Friday. That's tomorrow. And make sure you get your entry in. And here's how you could win that wonga.
It's the final week to see how you could be the winner of the Great British Giveaway. There's an incredible £18,000 in cash to be won, totally tax-free cash that you can do whatever you like with. That works out to be an extra £1,500 to play with each month for a whole year. You could put it towards monthly treats, save it for a rainy day, or just use it to take the pressure off in 2024. But hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Now, there's a mode that civil servants are demanding a 4-day week for the same pay and even some bonus holiday on top. The Public and Commercial Services Union, which is the biggest union representing public sector workers, has asked for a significant shortening of hours with no change to their salary. And in a letter to the Cabinet's office, Fran Heathcote, the General Secretary, you can see her there, also called for a pay rise and more annual leave. Wow, where to start? More money for doing the same job with more holiday on top. Wouldn't that be great for everybody? Well, I can now speak with Conservative Member of Parliament for Buckingham, Greg Smith, who joins me in the studio. So, Greg, on the one hand, we can roll our eyes and go, here we go, part-time, pyjama-clad, soya latte people working at home. On the other hand, is this a worrying sort of thin end of the wedge of what might come?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, this is a really absurd demand, right? In what other world can you go to your boss and say, I want to work a day less a week, but I want to stay on the same money? In the private sector, you'd be laughed out of town for that. Absolute joke. Yeah. You know, especially when you remember who pays for the civil service. We do. Taxpayers up and down the land who will be raising an eyebrow at this demand. But I fear, yeah, it is what would come should people go to the ballot box and elect a Labour government next time round, because we know Labour kowtow to whatever the unions say. We know the unions are the real bosses of Labour members of Parliament, and demands like this will become commonplace.
This is 200,000 civil servants across 213 government departments and agencies, a significant tranche. This is just a start. We've long heard the socialist dream of the 4-day week. It's been bandied about for years and years and years. Now it could become reality.
It could, although in some parts of the civil service, 4 days a week might actually be aspirational rather than limiting. The country does have big challenges as we've come out of COVID, as we're facing war on our own continent, as we're seeing for Foreign Office civil servants, conflicts all around the world. We need civil servants to be doing their job. We need them to have rocket boosters underneath them, delivering the services domestically and the things that we need them to be doing with the Foreign Office and the Ministry of Defence on a daily basis. A 4-day week just doesn't cut it.
Can I ask you another question about the political mindset? We know the unions are left-wing, 'twas ever thus, but the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs has also got a 4-day week, and they say it would boost staff well-being. Well, of course it would, having a day off a week, but we still, no, you and I, the taxpayers, still pay their salaries. But they want this to go forward because they agree with the politics. And we saw the Home Office also this week. Is it being captured by this mindset, this left-wing mindset? And in that sense, are these departments working contrary to your government?
Yes, I think they are. That's something that's been identified for a long time now. Go back to when Jacob Rees-Mogg was in the Cabinet. He had a big push to try and get civil servants to come back to their desks rather than this working from home culture where there isn't the same level of oversight, there isn't the same accountability. And we could see it all going a bit wrong back then, over a year ago. And I think the civil service has been captured into this mindset. They're expecting a change of government. They're holding out for that. Hopefully the electorate will give them a surprise and Conservatives will be returned to form the next government. However, people need their services now. They need their government functioning now. We need to be getting the waiting list down now. We need to be ensuring that farmers are getting their payments to keep growing the food that we all need to eat now. And if all the civil servants are cutting back on the time that they're actually spending on those important duties, we've got a problem.
We certainly have. Thank you very much, Greg, and great to see you still wearing your Israeli Union flag lapel pin there. Thanks for joining us in the studio. Always a pleasure. Now, there's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. Very shortly, we'll be heading to the small Cumbrian town of Millom, as residents are furious that amid a housing shortage, they are once again being forced to house 40 asylum seekers. They're not remotely happy about it. We'll be live there. First, your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
And the top stories this hour. The Commons Speaker has reiterated his apology for his handling of yesterday's debate on the Gaza ceasefire in the House of Commons. Sir Lindsay Hoyle told MPs he has a duty of care, and if his mistake has been looking after members of the House, then he says he is guilty. He's facing calls to resign for allowing both the government and Labour amendments to be debated. So far, more than 60 MPs have now declared no confidence in him. The UK and Jordan have been airdropping aid to a hospital in northern Gaza in a joint operation. Supplies include essential medicines, fuel and food for patients and staff. The Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, says it will help thousands of people. It's part of an agreement signed by the UK this week to deliver £1 million worth of aid to Gaza. Here in the UK, households could see their energy bills fall to the lowest level in 2 years. The energy regulator, Ofgem, is due to announce the latest price cap tomorrow, with experts predicting it'll drop by £293 a year. That would see the average household bill falling by 15%, from just over £1,900 annually to £1,635 a year from the start of April. And hundreds of victims of the Post Office IT scandal will have their names cleared under new legislation. The government says the new law, set to come into force in July, will overturn convictions of wrongly accused sub-postmasters. Post Office Minister Kevin Hollingrake conceded some guilty individuals may also be exonerated, but said the unprecedented intervention will deliver long overdue justice. For the very latest stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on the screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Let's take a quick look at the markets. The pound buying you $1.2615 and €1.1671. The price of gold is £1,601.82 an ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,685 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Polly. Now you're watching or listening to GB News. Coming up, we'll head to Cumbria as residents are furious as they are set to be forced to house 40 asylum seekers in a tiny coastal town. We'll be there live. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
Questions to be answered, and there seem to be a significant amount, does once again point its way to a public inquiry into exactly what happened in this case. Starmer's called for that. Would you call for that too?
I certainly think that first of all, there's one thing that's happening now. The NHS have to order an independent inquiry. That's been done. So they've got to look at all the whys and wherefores of what happened with this man. If it appears that we're not getting sufficient depth and breadth to this, then I think having an inquiry with all the powers that brings would be extremely advantageous. What I don't want is some long-winded inquiry that will take years, by which time other people will have been put at risk and maybe other lives have lost. We know what the problems are here, Camilla. Law's been passed on this. This is all about making sure on the ground we implement the highest degree of monitoring in order to ensure the safety of the public.
Has care in the community failed? I mean, it seems oxymoronic to say that it's care in the community in this case. We know that the number of psychiatric care beds has been slashed from 52,000 back in 2001 to 24,000 now. I've anecdotally, because I wrote my column about this in The Telegraph yesterday, received quite a lot of correspondence from people saying the situation with care in the community is dire. People aren't being adequately monitored. Was it a mistake to close down all of those mental institutions?
I don't think we should go back to those days when we had those appalling institutions where we just lock people away and forget about them, and not just mental health people, but autistic people and disabled people. Horrific way to treat individuals, and you know I campaign on that a lot.
I know.
However, I think if we move into a more community-based approach, which can be really good for many, many people who are on the spectrum and on that scale of mental health, we have to remember there will be a small but significant number who will continue to pose a danger.
Okay.
And that's why monitoring is so important.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 3:38. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, fury has been sparked over plans to house asylum seekers in a tiny coastal Cumbrian town in the grips of its own housing shortage, with 8 properties being used to put up around 40 newcomers from overseas. Now, police in the area have had to increase patrolling, and one of the houses was vandalised, you can see on screen there, with graffiti reading, "Not welcome, scum." Let's cross live now to Millom and speak to our northwest of England reporter, Sophie Reever. Sophie, this is a story that's really captured the public imagination. We spoke to a councillor yesterday. They're not at all happy about the situation. What's the latest?
Well, you're absolutely right, Martin. They're really not happy here in Millom. And I think one thing to really hone in on is the fact that residents here feel that they weren't given any kind of forewarning about what was planned with the HMOs. In fact, when we spoke to the mayor of the town earlier today, she also said that she, in fact, found out about the proposed plans via social media. So is it any wonder that we've been seeing outcry now? As you mentioned, there has been vandalism on some of the proposed properties, and the council have they've gone against that. They've said that they don't agree with that, but they have also made it so that the plans have now been paused. There's a meeting taking place here in Millom tonight where the local residents are hoping to find out some more information. We spoke to a few of them out here in Millom earlier today, and this is what they had to say.
We've been told by people from Whitehaven that they're emptying the Waverley Hotel, and 150 people were being sent to Millom from the Waverley Hotel. So if that's true, we know there's at least 20 properties that they tried to buy.
First of all, how many people are going to come in and what they're going to do, because there's not enough in Millom for the people who are already here.
I don't agree with it because nobody knew anything about it. We should have had more warning to what was happening. The government should have spoke to the local council.
I think that second gentleman there really touched on one of the crucial issues that people in Millom are concerned about, and that's the infrastructure here in this small seaside town. They've only got a population of about 5,500, so I think they're concerned about how potentially asylum seekers moving in here would affect them. Now, of course, it's the Home Office that are responsible for housing asylum seekers, so we did reach out to them for comment, and this is what they had to say. We've always been upfront about the unprecedented unprecedented pressure being put on our asylum system, brought about by a significant increase in dangerous and illegal journeys into the country over recent years. The Home Office has a statutory duty to provide safe and secure housing for asylum seekers, and we are continuing to work closely with local authorities, including in Millom, to manage any impact in the area and address local concerns. Now, I'm sure that will be a topic of conversation at this meeting here in Millom tonight, as local residents will want to know exactly how the Home Office plan to strike that balance between housing asylum seekers potentially here in this small town and also keeping them happy.
Sophie Reaper, a fantastic report, great reporting, speaking to locals, giving them a voice. That's what this channel does. Also worth adding, no dentists in that town. The nearest manned police station 45 minutes away, nearest hospital 40 minutes away, 123 people on the housing list. They can't get a home, and now they're being priced out of the market as the government hoovers up empty properties. We're going to make sure we stay on that story and give those locals a voice. Thank you very much. Now, in a new GB News series, Innovation Britain, we are looking at the successes of British manufacturing around the country.
We're here at Bowyer Engineering in Andover in the southwest of England. They take on lots of apprentices every single year. Sharon, why are apprenticeships important to Bowyer?
They're important to Bowyer, but they're important to all small manufacturing businesses everywhere, really. We've got a lack of real skills coming into the manufacturing business, and this allows us to get the apprentices in from the colleges. We can train them up, we work really closely with them, and we can keep the skills that we teach them.
And you're lucky enough to manage the apprentices here at Bowyer, Sharon. Yep. What does that apprenticeship scheme actually look like?
Okay, it's generally a 3 or 4 year course. We take the apprentices from the local colleges. We work really closely with them. Their assessors come out in 3 or 4 month periods. They assess them, we work really closely. We get them up, they get them up to the standard that they should be to complete their apprenticeships. And we teach them all we can here, essential skills for the small businesses that we need, and then hopefully they stay with us and carry on, and we've made brilliant machinists out of them. The local colleges are heavily funded by the government levy, so they get a lot of money in. So I think because of that, the colleges are putting in more effort into getting apprenticeships out there to the local businesses because they're funded. So we are only reaping the benefits for that.
But it's changing attitudes to apprenticeships here in Andover.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, you know, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.
No one would doubt your sincerity in your views. You genuinely believe in what you fight for. But there are others who think differently. For example, there are Islamist extremists who believe that people will go to hell unless they convert to Islam. They will sincerely, perhaps, break the law in order to force people to convert. In their view, they might be saving people's lives for eternity. There might be abortion activists who say that babies are being murdered and to save their lives we need to break the law to stop people having abortions. Why do you get to say that your moral conviction is the one that's right and other people's individual moral conviction are those that are wrong?
So what's really integral to the Just Stop Oil campaign is the fact that it is a non-violent campaign. That's what separates us from the examples that you've just given. We're absolutely dedicated non-violence, both as a tactic and as a principle. So though we might be breaking the law...
If individuals take it upon themselves to break the law for whatever their course is, surely the way that we decide what society wants in general is democratic and within the law.
Well, of course, we know also that protest is absolutely integral to maintaining and upholding a democracy, and in particular, non-violent protest. I mean, I really can't express to you how severe this situation is, and I'm sure you know this.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And welcome back. It's 3:47. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, military personnel deal with intense levels of pressure and the sort of harsh realities that many people can't even begin to imagine. And this leaves them highly vulnerable to the debilitating impact of post-traumatic stress disorder. 1 in 3 veterans have felt suicidal in their lifetime due to what they have witnessed and experienced, and charities are calling for more veterans to seek help with their mental health. Al O'Reilly has more, and just a warning, this report does include graphic descriptions of war.
So here's a picture of me in 1999 in Bosnia doing weapon training. I was 32 years old.
Valerie Redmore MacDonald had a career of 18 years in the army, but while serving in Bosnia during the Civil War, the warrant officer witnessed horrors she will never forget.
Just see a bland village with no art, no trees, no playgrounds, nothing, and then some of the horrific things that these people did to each other, burning each other alive literally in their houses, chopping off children's fingers, and one guy made a necklace of them.
Valerie was diagnosed with PTSD and still gets flashbacks. She's written poetry about her experiences to raise funds for the Royal British Legion.
It's really important to get that diagnosis and to admit that, you know, things aren't quite right for you, and then understand that it's normal for it not to be normal after what you've been through and what you've seen and witnessed.
Tragically, some veterans' mental health battles can end in suicide. Adrian Ellis's son George took his own life at the age of 24. He served as an infantryman for 6 years before leaving the army.
When you leave the forces, there's no rehabilitation back into civilian life. Having to fend for yourself when you come back out the forces is a culture shock. I'm not saying that was the cause of his suicide, but there has got to be more to be their support to male and females when they leave the forces.
To honour George's life, Adrian set up a group to encourage serving and former armed forces members to share their struggles.
George didn't reach out. George didn't talk. He paid the ultimate. His death can't be in vain. Suicide is such a taboo subject, and I wanted to make a difference. Since GEO's been formed, we know we've saved 5 veterans' lives. 99% of all suicides are preventable, but we've got to reach out and ask for that help.
Hi, it's Heidi. Yeah, I'm just ringing for your session. How are you doing?
Heidi Dodson's a counsellor who wants more veterans to seek professional help.
Veterans are actually the hardest people to come forward because actually they think they should be able to cope without somebody else's help. It takes men 2 years to come forward, if ever at all, for therapy, and 3/4 of suicides are men. So I'm passionate about changing that.
The atrocities witnessed never leave those who have served, but the hope here is for veterans not to suffer in silence. Anna Riley, GB News.
Yeah, an important and moving story to our veterans, the very best of British. Now, the independent reviewer of Prevent, the government's anti-terror programme, has warned the public faces an increased threat of Islamist terrorism and extremism because the government is simply not doing enough to tackle them. And there were also warnings that the failure to take tougher action was fuelling a dangerous rise in anti-Semitism. And this inaction stemmed from a continuing bias with Prevent towards tackling the rise in right-wing terrorism rather than the main threat of Islamist terrorism. Well, we can now speak with GBNews reporter Charlie Peters on this. Charlie, another report concluding inactivity against Islamic terror is because people are afraid of being called racist.
Well, this comes just a day after James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, said in its progress report in reaction to the Shawcross review that Prevent had returned to its core mission. Prevent is the public sector duty on public bodies such as schools, hospitals and nurseries to refer people to its agents if they fear there is a risk of extremism. It is the counter-extremism legal duty. But a day after, early yesterday, William Shawcross responded to James Cleverly's progress report by saying that the glass was only half full and the public is still at risk. In last year's review, he said that the Prevent duty had lost sight of its purpose and said that they had overestimated the impact of far-right terror and underplayed Islamist extremism. And it comes, Sir William's comments, just hours ahead of many parliamentarians reportedly cowering in fear inside Westminster as so many protesters gathered outside. Of course, Martin, you had your own run-in with those protesters last night. Now, Sir William said that the proposals to tackle Hamas had not been engaged with appropriately, and he said that Hamas organisers and sympathisers had not had a sufficient level of focus. And he said that Prevent and the police should have been working much harder to deal with them. And there are unfortunately quite a lot of their supporters in this country. Well, analysts and experts I've been speaking to throughout the day in reaction to Sir William's comments said that last night's events very much reinforced his analysis, and indeed they argued that the months and months of failed policing into the incidents we've seen on the streets of Britain, in particular in London, had emboldened those who went out last night. One researcher actually pointed out that the review into Prevent last year found that the Prevent Research Department, its unit there, hadn't done any work on Hamas in years and had failed to update its processes on anti-Semitism. For their part, the Home Office say that they've actually passed 30 of Sir William's 34 recommendations, but those responses from Sir William yesterday very much drawn into the limelight after last night's events in Westminster.
Charlie Peters, as ever, an excellent summary of another report concluding once again that a public body is too afraid to actually tackle the problem through fear of being called Islamophobic or racist. How long is this going to continue? We saw disgraceful scenes on the streets last night. The poison now infecting Parliament and the government's own anti-terror body, too afraid to grasp the nettle, to deal with the truth because of this undercurrent of fear of being exposed as being racist. It's absolutely out of control. We can only hope this will be a wake-up call. Now, we've got lots more coming in the next hour. You're watching and listening to GB News. Plenty more coming up, including the latest pressure on Sir Lindsay Hoyle, now called Just Stop Hoyle. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. There's further heavy rain to push eastwards through the rest of the day, but it will start to turn drier across the west over the next few hours. The heavy rains, as a result of this weather front that's been pushing eastwards through today, it's going to stall over the next few hours across the far southeast, but behind it it's turning colder and drier. So some further heavy rain to come in the east. We have got weather warnings still in force here, as well as wind warnings in the far southeast, but behind it will turn drier for many areas through tonight. tonight, so a much drier night to come, but it will be a colder night as we've got that colder air. So we could be down as low as -3 or 4 in the north tomorrow, as low as -1 in some rural areas further south. Frost will be fairly limited though, because we do have a fairly brisk westerly breeze through Friday. That's going to be pushing in showers from the west through the day. They'll be most frequent across western areas. Here they could merge into quite longer spells of rain, bringing a risk of hail and some thunder. The showers will drift into more eastern areas in the afternoon, but through the morning it should stay largely dry here. There'll be plenty of sunny spells as well. Temperatures much closer to average for the time of year across the UK. Showers should die down over Friday night slowly but surely to leave a much drier picture for Saturday morning, but there'll probably be quite a lot of fog around across central and eastern areas, but many areas should get away with some dry and sunny spells through Saturday, and it's looking like into the start of next week it should stay dry across the north with some rain arriving in the south. See you later.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-service men and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Yeah. Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 4 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. Just Stop Hoyle. House of Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle has reiterated his apology for his handling of the Gaza ceasefire debate after last night's chaos, where he was accused of helping Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer avoid another damaging revolt over the Gaza ceasefire. It's also emerged civil servants are demanding a 4-day week for the same pay. Can you Adam and Eve it? They all work from home anyway, don't they, in their pyjamas? I'll be speaking to an expert soon for his thoughts on that. And fury has been sparked over plans to house asylum seekers in a small coastal Cumbrian town in the grips of its very own housing shortage, with 8 properties set to be hoovered up and put around 40 migrants in there. The locals are not happy, and we'll head there soon for the full reaction on the ground. That's all coming up in your next hour. Thank you for joining us on the show this afternoon. It always means a lot to me. Also in this hour, I'll detail how I was assaulted last night by political extremists. Yes, they threw eggs at me. They'd also thrown a fluid at me. The police spectacularly failed to stop images being projected onto Big Ben, despite me telling them where they were and pointing out it was a public order offence. Men in balaclavas in direct contravention of the laws handed to the police just last week. The police did not want to know anything about it. I'll have the full video inside exclusive story on that coming up. Get in touch all the usual ways, gbviews@gbnews.com. Is this final proof the mob has taken over and we have 2-tiered policing? That's all coming up in a cracking next hour. But first, your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the Commons Speaker has reiterated his apology for the handling of yesterday's debate on the Gaza ceasefire. Sir Lindsay Hoyle told MPs he had a duty of care, and if his mistake was looking after members of the House, then he says he's guilty. Today, he's facing calls to resign for allowing both government and Labour amendments to be debated. More than 60 MPs have now declared no confidence in the Speaker. Sir Keir Starmer also denied threatening him or influencing any decision.
I can categorically tell you that I did not threaten the Speaker in any way whatsoever. I simply urged him to ensure that we had the broadest possible debate.
And your MPs?
Broadest possible debate, so that actually the most important thing, which is what do we do about the awful situation in Gaza, could be properly discussed by MPs with a number of options in front of them. That's the right thing to do. The Speaker did the right thing in making sure the debate was broad.
Sir Keir Starmer. Well, the Commons leader, Penny Mordaunt, defended Sir Lindsay, describing him as a decent man, and she blamed Labour for causing chaos in the Commons.
Nothing is more important than the interests of the Labour Party. The Labour Party before principle. The Labour Party before individual rights. The Labour Party before the reputation and honour of the decent man that sits in Speaker's chair. The Labour Party before fairness, integrity and democracy.
Well, the SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn told the Speaker his position is now untenable.
It ultimately turned into a Labour opposition day. That, quite frankly, is not acceptable. And as I have expressed to you privately prior to proceedings here today, we do not, on these benches, therefore believe that you can continue.
Well, in other news today, the UK and Jordan have airdropped aid to a hospital in northern Gaza. Supplies include essential medicines, fuel and food for patients, as well as staff, with the Foreign Secretary David Cameron saying it'll help thousands of people. It's all part of an agreement signed by the UK this week to deliver £1 million worth of aid to Gaza. Hundreds of victims of the Post Office IT scandal will have their names cleared under new legislation. The government says the law, set to come into force in July, will overturn the convictions of hundreds of wrongly accused sub-postmasters. Post Office Minister Kevin Hollinrake conceded some guilty individuals may also be exonerated, but said the unprecedented intervention will deliver long overdue justice.
Now, households could see their energy bills fall to the lowest level in 2 years. Energy regulator Ofgem is due to announce the latest price cap tomorrow, with experts predicting it'll drop by £293 a year. That would see the average household bill falling by 15%, from just over £1,900 a year to £1,635 a year from the start of April. Police chiefs are calling for new powers to allow them to instantly disqualify drink or drug drivers at the side of the road. Currently, people are only banned after being sentenced in court, but that can take weeks, during which time drivers are allowed to get back behind the wheel. The National Police Chiefs Council for Roads Policing also wants tougher penalties for motorists who kill while under the influence, including potential murder charges. Employers could be sued if they don't make reasonable adjustments for menopausal women in the workplace. The Equalities Watchdog has issued guidance to companies to clarify their legal obligations. Symptoms of the menopause include hot flushes, brain fog and difficulty sleeping, which can be considered a disability under the 2010 Equality Act if it impacts a woman's ability to carry out usual day-to-day professional activities. For the very latest stories, sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now let's get stuck into this next hour. We've got so much to get through, and let's start with the biggest story. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is fighting to save his political career as the SNP's Westminster leader, Stephen Flynn, has confirmed his party no longer has confidence in him, despite Sir Lindsay reiterating his apology for his handling of the debate on a Gaza ceasefire.
Last evening we saw the best of this House and its ability to debate. And we also saw the worst of this House as it descended into farce. And I think I speak for everyone in the chamber just now, and indeed yesterday, when I expressed my deep sorrow that that was able to happen, given the content of what it was we were debating. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, it descended into farce because of a decision that you made, and you alone made, to ignore the advice that was given to you by the clerks. And as I have expressed to you privately prior to proceedings here today, we do not, on these benches, therefore believe that you can continue in your role as Speaker. We do not have confidence in your ability to do so. So I would therefore welcome clarity, either from yourself or indeed from the Leader of the House, as to how we can best facilitate a vote in this chamber at the earliest possible occasion.
Well, the SNP knives are certainly out, and meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer has strenuously denied claims that he threatened Sir Lindsay Hoyle to select his party's amendment in the Gaza ceasefire debate so he could avoid a large rebellion, saying he simply urged the Commons Speaker to have the broadest possible debate by putting a number of options in front of MPs. Well, I'm joined now live from Westminster Hall by GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope. Chris, the knives are certainly out. The campaign to just stop Hoyle. The last time we spoke, 63 signatures. A parliamentarian friend, Chris, I spoke to this morning, said the scenes in Parliament yesterday were reminiscent of a South American junta. Carnage in the chamber.
Not quite a junta, certainly as bad as the bad days of Brexit, when the Commons couldn't decide on the future of this country and wouldn't or didn't seem to want to at that point honour the vote from millions of people in 2016. Certainly as bad as that. I wouldn't go far as South America. I can say, though, just revealing now that we now have 65 MPs supporting a motion of no confidence in the Speaker of the House of Commons. That's exactly 1 in 10 Tory MPs signing a petition saying they have no confidence in his speakership. That is really bad. That is 3 times as many as were required that forced Michael Martin out in 2009. Right now, the Speaker is meeting with party leaders. He has met with Sir Ed Davey, the Lib Dem leader. That's one of the easier meetings he has today. Harder will be with the leaders or the whips of the SNP and the Conservative Party. How that happens, well, and how that goes, we'll wait and see. But it really is difficult here for the Speaker. He's got to try and somehow win round the support of the SNP. As you heard there in that clip, Stephen Flynn, the Westminster leader, saying that the party no longer has confidence in Speaker Lindsay Hoyle. Tory MPs tell me one way of dealing with this could be for the Speaker to say from the chair that he was put into a position by Labour to try and back that second amendment, the one that's controversial, the one that hasn't been done in 30, 40 years or so. Say that he's pushed into that by Labour, he wished he hadn't done, so almost put one back on Labour. That might almost redress the ledger in terms of being impartial and above politics, as he should be. That's one idea. Someone else, Labour think that it's going nowhere. They think the Speaker will survive. On the Tory side, I've been told if he gets to 100 by Monday, the Speaker will have real problems surviving, and there could be this motion in the Commons there to debate the future of the Speaker. Highly embarrassing and possibly fatal for his chance of staying on. Very, very complicated, very bubbly, not really an issue to concern the wider country, more about the febrile nature of Parliament, and this place is facing an election year, and this is the kind of thing that happens. Lots of stuff happens. It's controversial, it's fast and furious, but that's politics in the 21st century.
Chris, yesterday we were remarking upon the fact that the mob that was gathering outside Parliament, holding up placards saying such things as your grandchildren will know how you voted, with the implication we've seen politicians being harassed out of office, firebombs, threats, arson attacks. In the case of Mike Freer, Rachel Reeves being harassed on the campaign trail from the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer himself being chased off a train in Scotland, Angela Rayner getting street-level harassment. Is this an indication, you think, that the mob outside and the poison from the streets is now infecting parliamentary actions inside? And Chris, if so, that's an extremely worrying thing.
Well, I don't think that. We know that. That's what Lindsay Hoyle said. He said he was aware of the pressure on MPs, the pressure on particularly Labour MPs representing Muslim areas where there might be lots of campaigners for the Palestinians against Israel. He's aware of that pressure, and therefore he felt that Labour MPs should have a vote, not be forced to vote for the SNP motion, and that would, of course, have led to some MPs resigning from the front bench of that party, the Labour Party, or for the government position, which is much not as strong as where the SNP were wanting to go. He wanted to give them a third way, a third option. By doing that, he allowed them to vote for something. But the problem is, it's meant the other two parties have cried foul and walked off the pitch and said this guy isn't being a fair dealer with us. And that's why the SNP today are saying there's got no confidence in the Speaker. He's trying to do his best. He's a decent man, the Speaker, as Penny Mordaunt, the leader of the House of Commons, said this morning. The problem is he's got into an utter mess here by trying to do right by everybody. That's not how politics works. A lot of Tory MPs tell me they have been made to vote against the government or do unpalatable votes, and that voting that is then clipped up on social media by Labour, used to damage them locally. They see it used against them. As soon as Labour feels the heat of a difficult Opposition Day debate, they get helped out by the Speaker. And that's why, in a nutshell, Tory MPs are so cross. But you're absolutely right, to go back to your point, Martin, there is pressure on MPs outside of this place, and that's now being felt in the Commons chamber. And that's what people like Geoffrey Cox are cross about and concerned about, and that's why they think the Speaker has got a lot of apologising to do. Maybe not go. Certainly Sir Geoffrey Cox and others think he should stay.
Okay, Chris Hope, astonishing scenes, astonishing. Thank you very much for that update. A lot of people will be asking themselves today, who's actually running this country if the vote, if the Speaker, if they're succumbing to the mob on the streets? This is the thin end of something dark and dangerous. We'll, of course, keep a close eye on that story throughout the rest of the show. Now, with all the political chaos that has engulfed the House of Commons over the last 24 hours, lots of attention will undoubtedly be taken off the issue that was being debated in the chamber. whether the UK should call for an immediate ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. But does Israel even care what British political parties have to say about a ceasefire? After all, why should they? Well, let's find out now, because I'm joined by Gershon Baskin, who is a hostage negotiator. Thank you very much for joining us, Gershon. So, the British Parliament now has also done its bit. Virtue signalled there should be a ceasefire, add to the United Nations, add to the Red Cross, add to South Africa. The big question is, Gershon, will Israel even care?
I think that in general, Israel cares about public opinion, but Israel wants to see fair public opinion. If Israel is being called on to halt its fire in the Gaza Strip, it wants to know that the world is also demanding that Hamas release all the Israeli hostages, 134 people still being held by Hamas, women, children, elderly people, soldiers taken from their homes from a music festival. I think it's also important to note that the world should be concerned that the Gaza Strip should not be ruled by Hamas anymore. Hamas crossed a red line on October 7th that separated it from the rest of humanity, and we can no longer tolerate Hamas being the ruling government in the Gaza Strip, and this needs to be factored in. Of course, I want to see a ceasefire. I want to see this war ended, but the war can't end as long as Gaza is being controlled by Hamas.
And Gershon, we spoke to Colonel Richard Kemp yesterday. He's the former commander of the British Army. He wrote a very powerful piece saying the people who most want a ceasefire are Hamas, and they'll be delighted by the fact that the British Parliament is giving credence to the idea of a ceasefire. The benefactors of all of this are Hamas terrorists. Astonishing situation.
I think it's true that Hamas definitely wants a ceasefire and they would benefit from it. But we also need to think about the 2.2 million people living in the Gaza Strip. Many women and children and innocent people, non-combatants who are suffering terrible, who have lost their homes, who are now cramped into 20% of the Gaza Strip in the south prior to an Israeli invasion of the last city in the Gaza Strip. I think the world needs to be concerned about this situation. This conflict, which used to just concern the Israelis and the Palestinians, now concerns regional security and international security. The security of the globe is threatened by this conflict, and the international community needs to weigh in. I would be happy to hear in the United Kingdom saying we are prepared now to recognize the state of Palestine, not as a reward for terrorism, but understanding that the two-state solution must be implemented, and the best way to defeat Hamas is by giving the Palestinian people what Hamas has been against, the two-state solution, recognizing the state of Israel and the state of Palestine, and pushing Israelis and Palestinians to get back to the table to get this done.
And Gershon, one suggestion put forward by Colonel Kemp, which doesn't seem to be on the table of Joe Biden or the British Parliament, is the notion of a humanitarian solution where citizens are allowed, at least temporarily, into Egypt. So the IDF can go into Rafah and finish off Hamas. But that doesn't seem to be an option to Western liberals. They seem to think that the ceasefire should be a blanket ceasefire, which, of course, would allow Hamas to regroup and re-attack.
Right, of course, Egypt needs to be consulted on this, in that it would have to open its territory. The Egyptians are afraid that the temporary removing of Palestinians from Gaza would be permanent, and they would become responsible for 2 million people, and that the Palestinian issue would once again be thrown off on neighbors of facilitating an ethnic cleansing of a territory which is Palestinian.
OK, and as we have you here, Gershon, you are a hostage negotiator. Can you tell us the latest about the hostage situation? We had the cousin of one of the young women still inside Gaza on the show a couple of weeks ago, an incredibly moving story, and, of course, largely forgotten about by the media.
Right, well, President Biden's senior aide, Brett McGurk, is in the area, and he's pushing Israel to show up at another meeting in Paris, probably tomorrow, with the head of the CIA and the head of Egyptian intelligence, the Qatari prime minister, the Israeli head of the Mossad. There seems to be a possibility of a breakthrough. I hope it's true. They are talking about a pause in the fighting and not an end to the war in exchange for the release of civilian hostages and Israeli and Palestinian prisoners from Israel. We all need a break in this war, and we need to get those hostages home as soon as possible.
Superb positive note to end on there. Gershon Baskin, a hostage negotiator. Thank you very much for joining us on GB News. Fascinating stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, last night, thousands of pro-Palestine protesters descended on Westminster to put pressure on MPs to support a suspension of fighting in Gaza. And I decided to go along and join them. Well, why don't we have a look at what's happened? Yeah, as you can see, I was egged by a political extremist, and the police simply took 2 strides towards her and pivoted away. Had no interest whatsoever. And why don't I walk you now through some of what else was going on last night? For starters, this is what I saw when I left work. A projection being cast onto Big Ben. Upon closer inspection, you can see it was saying, stop the war, stop the bombs, and also from the river to the sea. Pro-Palestinian messages being projected onto the Elizabeth Tower, Big Ben, and that is an offence. I know that because a law came in 2016 prohibiting this because images were being projected onto Parliament about anti-Brexit. And why don't I show you another one here? Because I eventually went to find out where this projection was coming from. It was on the green opposite Parliament. You can see there in the distance. So I walked over. There it is. It's a device no bigger than a motorcycle battery on a tripod lashed onto the barrier. And as you can see now, it projects all the way over onto Elizabeth Tower, Big Ben. I told the police repeatedly about this. I said, what are you going to do? This is an offence. Go and remove it. The world's media will see these images. And they didn't even do that. They didn't do it. And so then I went over and I saw men in full-face balaclavas. And I pointed out to officers in attendance that this is an offence. February the 8th, laws were passed in the Public Order Act preventing full-face coverings at these protests because it's how criminals avoid detection through CCTV, facial recognition, you name it. The police have no interest whatsoever in arresting that guy, despite the fact I pointed it out to him. And then later after that, they threw fluids at me, which thankfully was water. They threw eggs at me, and they recorded it as an assault, but no one has got them. And I put images out there. I'm being pressed to file for an assault. OK, let's move on. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak reiterated his government's position by calling for an immediate humanitarian pause in Gaza while on a visit to North Wales today.
Well, what happened in the House of Commons last night is very concerning. It seems that the usual processes and the way that the House of Commons worked were changed. Now, my understanding is that the Speaker has apologised for that and is going to reflect on what happened.
The Speaker, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, said that he made that decision to allow Labour's amendment out of concern to a seat of MPs. He didn't want another MP.
Good question.
Do you accept that explanation?
As I said, I think the Speaker has apologised, is my understanding, for what happened last night, because the usual ways in which Parliament works were changed, and that is concerning. The Speaker said he's going to reflect on that. But the substance of this and the government's position is very clear. We want to see an immediate pause in what's happening in Gaza so that we can get more aid in and, crucially, get the hostages out, including the British hostages, and we can use that as a foundation to build a sustainable, lasting ceasefire. But that involves Hamas having no part to play in future governance of Gaza. We're also increasing our aid right now. Just last night, for the first time, we dropped aid by air into a hospital in northern Gaza, making a difference on the ground to people who need that help.
So do you accept the Speaker's explanation? Does he have your backing, Sir Lindsay?
As I said, what happened in Parliament last night was concerning because the usual ways in which Parliament works were changed. Now, my understanding is that the Speaker has apologised for what happened and is reflecting on that. But I think the important point here is that we should never let extremists intimidate us into changing the way in which Parliament works. Parliament is an important place for us to have these debates, and just because some people may want to stifle that with intimidation or aggressive behaviour, we should not bend to that and change how Parliament works. That's a very slippery slope. It's not the right way to go.
Some of your MPs are calling on the government to bring forward their own debate on Gaza so that each party can have their say. Will you do that?
Well, the government's position is very clear. What we want to see is an immediate humanitarian pause in hostilities, which will allow us to get the hostages out, including the British hostages, but also get more aid in to people who need it. And we can use that immediate pause to then build the conditions for a sustainable ceasefire, which can last. And that means Hamas crucially not having any role to play in Gaza. But right here and now, we are getting more aid in. Just yesterday, we dropped by air for the first time aid into northern Gaza, into a hospital, together with the Jordanians. That is making a difference on the ground.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And that was the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak in North Wales talking about the Gaza ceasefire and the calamity in Parliament yesterday, saying we should never let extremists pressure us into how we work in Parliament. Well, many may think that genie is out of the bottle. Now, you're watching and listening to GB News. Coming up, very shortly, we'll be heading to the small Cumbrian town of Millom as residents are furious that amid a housing shortage of their own, they're being forced to house 40 asylum seekers with no consultation. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
So the highway code was amended recently. Passed me by, but anyway, a new poll suggests this has made no difference to the safety of road users, and I could believe that.
Yeah, there was an awful crash in London, wasn't there? A bus and a pedestrian yesterday.
Fatality.
So we're asking, is the highway code fit for purpose, or should we just scrap it altogether? That's our debate this morning, and we're joined by Danny Kelly. She argues highways are not fit for purpose, and cycling instructor Anna Hughes thinks they are. Good morning to you both.
You see, Anna, I think it's a good thing. I think the highway code is a good thing. I just don't think that any of us pay any attention to it, or we should all be tested on it quite regularly, I would have thought. We should have revision courses in it.
Yeah, I think you just summed it up, Eamon, by saying the changes passed you by. I actually asked a few of my fellow cyclists and pedestrians, what is classified as vulnerable road users, about this very thing. I said, has the new highway code made things safer for you? And most people said, not at all. Drivers don't know what it is. They don't know what the changes are. They probably don't know what the rules are to start with. And as you've just said, doing refreshers is a really good idea. It's a bit bizarre that we're given a license to operate this quite dangerous machinery, and then we're never tested again, and especially not on the highway code, which is, especially when it changes, why wouldn't we be retested on that or have to do refresher courses on it? You know, there are conflicts on the road, there are fatalities. It makes sense to be aware of what the highway code says, because it is there to keep us safe.
Yeah, Danny Kelly, when I think back, I think it was 1999 I passed my driving test. Hardly any bikes on the road then, to be honest, probably virtually none.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's approaching 4:29. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, it's the last week to enter our great British giveaway, our last chance to win 18 grand in cold, hard cash, tax-free as well. Now, here, lines close tomorrow, and here's all the details that you need to get your entry in on time.
It's the final week to see how you could be the winner of £18,000 in tax-free cash. That's like having an extra £1,500 each month for the next year. Listen to the moment we told Phil from West Yorkshire he'd won our last great British giveaway.
Hello.
Phil, I've got some really good news for you. You're the winner of the Great British Giveaway.
You're joking. That's brilliant news.
But hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
Now, fury has been sparked over plans to house asylum seekers in a tiny Cumbrian coastal town in the grips of its very own housing shortage, with 8 properties being used to put up around 40 newcomers from overseas. Police in the area have had to increase patrolling after one of the houses was vandalised, with graffiti, as you can see on your screen, reading, "Not welcome, scum." Let's cross live now to Millom and speak to our northwest of England reporter Sophie Reaper. Sophie, thank you for joining us again. We spoke to a councillor from Millom yesterday. 40 asylum seekers being dumped on the town. No consultation, no say in the matter, and it's fair to say they're not at all happy about it.
They're not all happy about it, and tonight at the meeting that's being held here in Millom for local residents to air their concerns and to hear from the higher-ups, I'm sure there will be plenty said. Now, you mentioned there they had no idea about this. In fact, the mayor and the chair of the town council also had no idea about these proposed plans until it was leaked on social media, of all things. So it's no wonder really that there has been outcry from the local community. However, they have disparaged the antisocial behaviour and the vandalism that has taken place on some of the proposed properties. We spoke earlier to the chair of the council, and this is what he had to say.
If the public hadn't outcried of this, you know, there's potential for as many 40 properties in Millom that would have been heading down this HMO route. And that's totally inappropriate for a town of this size. We absolutely get that the government has to house these people, and we actually get that they want to disperse them across the country in all communities. But it needs to be appropriate and suitable for the community. And what was planned for Millom is definitely not suitable for this community.
And I think the word appropriate is the crucial word there. Of course, this is a very, very small coastal town. They have a population of around 5,700. So it's the infrastructure that is concerning a lot of Millom's residents. You mentioned earlier, Martin, about the lack of dentists, the difficulty to get doctor's appointments. And these are the kind of things that are concerning the people of Millom. And I think that is exactly what's going to be voiced at the meeting tonight. The plans have been paused for now, but going forward it's going to be really quite difficult to get a balance between the Home Office, who say they have a responsibility to safely house asylum seekers, whilst also balancing that with the needs of Millom as a small town with deficient infrastructure.
Sophie Reaper, excellent reporting. I said this to you the last hour. I'm so chuffed that we get up there and give these people a voice, because they are voiceless. Nobody listens to them. And just to add some further information to what you said there, Sophie, it's 45 minutes to the nearest manned police station, 40 minutes to the nearest hospital. The infrastructure isn't there. The locals weren't consulted. 123 locals on the housing lists. They're simply being ignored, shoved to the back of the queue. Sophie Reaper, great stuff. And we'll keep a close eye on this story and make sure the Home Office listens to the residents of Millom. Now, still lots more to come between now and 5 o'clock. In a moment, we'll be discussing a Tory MP's claims that skyrocketing post-Brexit immigration into the UK is making the UK housing crisis worse, and it's driving up rent. Yeah, we've been saying that for absolutely donkey's years. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
So a new poll has revealed that Gen Z or Gen Z, I don't know how I'm supposed to say it, and British boys and men are more likely to believe that feminism has done more harm than good when compared with older respondents. So the polling also found that a quarter of UK males aged 16 to 29 believe it's harder to be a man than a woman, with 1 in 5 looking favourably upon controversial influencer Andrew Tate. 37% of them also agree that the phrase toxic masculinity is unhelpful. So, with Gen Z boys increasingly holding this view, has feminism done more harm than good? Let me know your thoughts. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, tweet me @gbnews, and make sure you take part in our poll. But I'll bring you those results shortly. Going head-to-head on this tonight, our author and commentator Anna May Mangan and YouTuber and social media influencer Pearl Davies. Both of you, thank you very much. Pearl, I'll start with you. Has feminism done more harm than good, especially when it comes to these Gen Z boys?
Yes, it has. Feminism really has turned into a bunch of crybaby women that want to complain that we're not given equal opportunity when really women are given more opportunity than men. And so, yeah, I would say feminism is a hate group and it's a bunch of crybaby women.
Anna, would you like to come back to that? Crybaby women feminism, apparently.
So we've got a right lad with us tonight with Pearl and her opinions, haven't we? How could it possibly do harm? Pearl wouldn't do. I hope you vote. I assume you do. I hope you're not chained to the kitchen sink at home. I'm not sure if you've got a job, so I don't know very much about you, but you're probably, if there's a bloke doing the same thing as you, you're probably earning less than him. So of course feminism is something that it got us the vote in the first place, and it's still doing a power of good. It's just whingy men, and actually I changed that. They're lads, they're not men.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:37. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is fighting to save his political career and his political life as the SNP announced that it has no confidence in him as Speaker. This comes as Sir Keir Starmer strenuously denies claims that he threatened Mr Speaker to select his party's amendment in the Gaza ceasefire debate.
I can categorically tell you that I did not threaten the Speaker in any way whatsoever. I simply urged him to ensure that we have the broadest possible debate.
And your MPs?
Broadest possible debate, so that actually the most important thing, which is what do we do about the awful situation in Gaza, could be properly discussed by MPs with a number of options in front of them. That's the right thing to do. The Speaker did the right thing in making sure the debate was broad.
Now, this year, parts of England will get the chance to elect a regional mayor for the very first time, as powers held centrally in Westminster are gradually being given to leaders locally. The successes of devolution in places like Greater Manchester and the West Midlands has triggered recognition that decisions on how to spend funding for housing, education and transport perhaps should be made closer to home, like in the East Midlands, where residents vote this May. But not everyone welcomes or indeed is even aware of the new position. Our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has this story.
In an election year, the nation's voice is amplified. Before choosing a Prime Minister, parts of the country will elect a mayor. In the East Midlands, for the first time, councils in Derby and Derbyshire, Nottingham and Nottinghamshire form a new combined county authority. With the mayor comes new powers to shape the future locally for 2.2 million people. Devolution means greater choices on transport, on skills and education, for the environment and housing. But not everybody here is keen on the idea of a new layer of politician. In a public consultation held by councils in 2022, fewer than half of people said they were in favour of electing a mayor.
Have you heard of that?
No.
I don't know anything about it.
Sounds right, so yeah, definitely for that. I think there's always room for someone with perhaps different ideas.
Devolution transfers powers held centrally in Westminster back to local government. Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland have enjoyed devolution since the late 90s. In 2000, the Greater London Authority was created. Since 2015, the West Midlands, Greater Manchester and Liverpool City region, plus 7 other areas, have created combined authorities, most with a mayor leading. This year, that extends to York and North Yorkshire, the East Midlands, plus expanded powers for the North East. The government is pushing devolution as a central pillar in its levelling up promise. Acres Engineering is based in Melbourne, Derbyshire. The East Midlands is historically one of the lowest funded regions. Devolution means more money, around £4 billion worth of investment here. Managing Director Luke says it could transform the region.
We need investors to see what a phenomenal region the East Midlands is, and hopefully we're having a mayor with the powers and the funding behind them can really attract the type of investment we need to continue with our growth.
The mayoral election in May signals the start of a new era, connecting counties that have a deeply shared tradition of rivalry and collaboration. There's power in a vote. Will Hollis, GB News in the East Midlands.
Now, if you'd like to learn more about the East Midlands mayoral election, head to gbnews.com where you can hear from all the candidates standing to be the new regional mayor. But now let's return to the pressure facing Common Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle and speak with former Labour Party MP Stephen Pound. Stephen, welcome to the show. So we've heard from Sir Keir Starmer. He is strenuously denying placing pressure on the Speaker. But the bigger question I have for you, Stephen, is the mob on the streets now ruling the votes that are held? The feeling that if the Labour Party vote wasn't held, then their MPs could be in danger. Is this the thin end of Parliament bowing to the poison on British streets?
No, I mean, you raised an incredibly important point there. And don't forget, we're in a context where 2 MPs have been murdered in recent years. We had the business with Tobias Ellwood's family being treated abominably by people banging drums outside their houses. We're in a very, very dangerous place now. But can we just focus in on what this is actually all about for a second? Everybody with a drop of humanity in their body wants to see an end to the horrors in Gaza. But does anybody think for 1 second, 1 millisecond, that a vote in the British House of Commons is going to be adhered to by Hamas? Are they going to say, the British MPs have voted for a ceasefire, let's lay down our guns and release the hostages? It ain't going to happen. Today, there is aid going into northern Gaza through Jordan, supported by the British government. That is real, that is practical, that is helpful, that is positive. The idea that you can somehow make a sort of a mob voice to create a political position in the UK that will affect both Tel Aviv and Gaza is absolutely nonsensical. Look, so it's always easier to find a scapegoat than it is to find a solution. And I entirely understand, dear God, I understand how the agony that is seeping through the people at the present time. But don't they realise that by doing what they are doing, by screaming outside, by threatening people's houses, by talking about beheading the MP in Brent North, all these horrendous things that are happening, then in all honesty, they're not serving their cause, they're not serving the people of Palestine, and above all, they're not serving the democratic structures of this country.
Stephen, I'll raise you further. I spoke to Colonel Richard Kemp yesterday, former commander of the British Army, and he said that the ceasefire has been voted on in places like Britain and South Africa and Canada and the Red Cross, the UN. Actually, the people who'll be happiest about that are Hamas terrorists themselves. These votes embolden them. They want the ceasefire to come ahead because they want to regroup and re-attack.
I think there's two things that are happening here. You're absolutely right, and Richard Kebb is correct on this. If there were a ceasefire, then quite clearly that would be an opportunity. Don't forget, there's still an army of a couple of thousand of Hamas fighters in southern Gaza. They would have the opportunity, and we still know that there is still certain armaments and material are coming through. There is that. However, there is something happening on the world stage. I'm not just talking about some of the usual suspects, but a lot of countries like Australia and some other countries are starting to say to America, you are the only player on the pitch here. You're the only person who can make any difference. Because if you don't, then Russia, through its stooges in Syria, or even worse, Iran, through its stooges in Hezbollah and Hamas, will be making the play here. So there is a mood in the world that I think that Israel is possibly going almost too far, down in Rafah. But the reality is, as we heard in the Knesset in the Israeli parliament yesterday, they've now absolutely thrown out the idea of a two-state solution. They're going to go into Rafah. They're going to go through every single last tunnel, every last little hiding place, and they're going to try to kill every single member of Hamas. Now, the idea that they no longer work towards a two-state solution has horrendous consequences, because it's not just about Israel. It's not just about Gaza. It's not just about the West Bank. What we will then see is Syria, Iraq, Yemen, over and over again throughout the Middle East. And don't forget, when they sneeze, we catch a cold, to turn the old saying on its head. All our oil supplies coming through then. Do we really want political instability and a continuation of the Saudi versus Iranian war that's raging at the present time in Yemen, spreading even wider? Do we want that to go to Iraq, to Lebanon, to Syria? Dear God, we don't want that. But please don't think that anybody, by threatening MPs and screaming at them and saying we're complicit in genocide, what? Does that really do anything for the Palestinian cause other than treat them as political footballs? And I think that there are some people in the SNP whose emotions and their motives are absolutely honourable, and I admire and respect them. However, there are some people who are playing the dirtiest form of politics in this. They're dipping their tongues in a pool of poisoned blood on this, and they really should be bloody unashamed of themselves. Sorry, I didn't mean to swear.
No, Stephen Pound, strong words as ever. And yeah, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Now, you're watching and listening to GB News. Plenty more to bring you in just a moment, including the pressures that post-Brexit migration is having on our housing crisis. Guess what? More people equals higher rent. Who would have thought it? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
When you listen to Nigel Farage's assessment there, do you feel that maybe this is as good as it was going to get, given that we had the pandemic and it was inevitably always going to be a bit of a mixed bag?
Well, I think it's a bit of a poor excuse from Nigel there that they haven't done it properly. The facts are, Nigel, that it's not worked. It's not going to work. Yes, we will rejoin. I mean, are we better off for it? Are they...
Can I jump in there, Charlie? We're going to rejoin under which government? Because Labour aren't going to do that, unless you don't think...
But I mean, it's going to be unavoidable not to join, because I think it's getting worse and worse for us. I mean, let me just say this. Are the NHS better because we're out of Europe? No, they're not, because they're not employing more staff. Is the building trade better off? No. Is travelling abroad or to the EU or staying in the EU, are we better off? No. Are we better off because foods rise because of the EU? No. Are we better off with imports and export? No, because they're taking longer. The overall result is that we're not better off. The killer point here is 57% of the public will now vote to remain. 33% would leave. Surely that's the telling point.
It depends on the pollster, Charlie, because we were talking to a very good pollster earlier who said there's no enthusiasm for any change in a year. Maybe 10 years, they might be thinking about it.
Belinda de Lucia, let's bring you in. I'm sure you want to react to what Charlie said.
I mean, who would have thought that the UK wanting to run its own affairs and making our politicians more accountable would be so revolutionary? EU Parliament voted a majority to get rid of the vetoes, the last remaining scraps of democracy that the EU had. Now, luckily for EU citizens at the moment, you know, it means a treaty change to actually go forward. But that is the mood. The ever closer union. We have dodged a federalised, globalist, international, power-gobbling, anti-democratic organisation, and that's worth more than a few trade and travel perks for a few wealthy people in this country.
Hear, hear. Belinda DeLucy, Charlie Mullins, great to see you both.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. 4:49 now. Migration is making the housing crisis worse, and that's according to Tory MP Neil O'Brien. The former Levelling Up minister says that while migrants are not to blame solely for the housing crisis, increasing populations are raising rents. Who would have thought it? Well, property expert Russell Quirk joins me now. Russell, it seems they've finally woken up to the concept of supply and demand. Who would have thought it?
Well, it's great to see, isn't it, an MP on the Tory side that's been in government for 14 years actually stating the bleeding obvious, which is if you get population increase, both by people living longer and also 750,000 people coming to these shores and contributing to increased population, if you don't build enough houses, which we haven't done, by the way, since the 1960s, guess what happens? That shortage then translates into higher prices. I mean, who knew? Who knew that schoolboy, schoolgirl economics formula would kind of take hold? But Martin, I think the astonishing thing here is that this MP, Neil O'Brien, and I bear him no malice, I don't know the man, but he used to be the Levelling Up minister. So he was one of the people responsible specifically for ensuring, we think, that there should be enough homes built in Britain. And this government and the previous one and the previous one and the previous one, and by the way, the next one, whoever it's going to be, have catastrophically failed to ensure that enough housing, whether it be what I call retail housing, so housing that gets sold, or whether it's council housing, whether it's social housing, whether it's affordable housing, that enough is built to furnish the population of this country. And for these Tory MPs, including Michael Gove the other day, by the way, saying, well, actually, I think if we don't provide enough housing for our young, we might disenfranchise them democratically. Yeah, no kidding. But it's your fault. You've been in power for 14 years, you muppet.
And Russell, some of the data is astonishing when you look into the detail. The idea that Britain is full because we're smaller is totally backed up. In the UK, 38% of households spend more than 40% of their disposable income on housing versus 25% in the Eurozone. And the most astonishing piece of information here for me, Russell, in London, 67% of households are headed up by somebody born overseas.
Yeah, and this is why we call it a housing crisis, because the consequence of that shortage, the difference between supply and demand, is always going to be higher prices, and on the political side here, I know I'm on this time as a kind of housing commentator. On the political side, when you see the report this week that since 2020, immigration to this country has cost something like £24 billion to the taxpayer, because and the GDP of this country, by the way, although it's flat and we were in Q3, Q4 last year in recession, GDP per capita, so the size of our economy per person, has dropped and dropped and dropped, because I'm afraid, and this won't be a popular thing to say, but it happens to be statistically proven as true, our attitude as a country, as a society, as a government, in terms of bringing in mass migration, no matter what the electorate says, is economically stupid, because the size of the economy as a consequence, the money that we're paying out for the luxury of having this wonderful cultural integration, Martin, that is kind of being forced upon us against the will of many in the electorate, it simply doesn't add up economically, let alone the housing. What are we doing?
Russell Quirk, common sense coming out of your every pore. Thank you very much for joining us. As ever, superb analysis. Now, it's got time for a few emails, and the main topic has been last night's protests. David says this: as the government has lost control and is heading for anarchy, is it time to put the army on standby, as these are very worrying times now? Chris adds this: Martin, you were very brave to walk through the mob with the total lack of police intervention. That is a very brave thing to do. I don't think it was. I just went there on my way home and filmed what I saw. It's my job to document what's going on. It's my job to document if the police are standing by as the mob pelts me with eggs, with fluids, hurl abuse, men in balaclavas, disgusting images being projected onto the Tower of Elizabeth, Big Ben there. This is against the law. It's an offence. I was pleading with police to make arrests, pointing out offenders, pointing out their very own public order legislation. They had absolutely no interest in upholding the law. And look what happened. The mob outside got inside the minds of those inside, and we were heading for calamity. Plenty more to bring you in the next hour. Keep your views coming in. gbviews@gbnews.com. Stick around. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. There's further heavy rain to push eastwards through the rest of the day, but it will start to turn drier across the west over the next few hours. The heavy rains, as a result of this weather front that's been pushing eastwards through today, it's going to stall over the next few hours across the far southeast, but behind it, it's turning colder and drier. So some further heavy rain to come in the east. We have got weather warnings still in force here, as well as wind warnings in the far southeast, but behind it, it will turn drier for many areas through tonight. So a much drier night to come, but it will be a colder night as we've got that colder air. So we could be down as low as -3 or 4 in the north tomorrow, as low as -1 in some rural areas further south. Frost will be fairly limited though, because we do have a fairly brisk westerly breeze through Friday. That's going to be pushing in showers from the west through the day. They'll be most frequent across western areas here. They could merge into quite longer spells of rain, bringing a risk of hail and some thunder. The showers will drift into more eastern areas in the afternoon, but through the morning it should stay largely dry here. There'll be plenty of sunny spells as well. Temperatures much closer to average for the time of year across the UK. Showers should die down over Friday night slowly but surely to leave a much drier picture for Saturday morning, but there'll probably be quite a lot of fog around across central and eastern areas, but many areas should get away with some dry and sunny spells through Saturday, and it's looking like into the start of next week it should stay dry across the north with some rain arriving in the south. See you later.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama.
Yeah.
And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting, and that you had... Obviously, I was in no pain or anything like that. I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why, if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions. We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it's 5 p.m. and welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK. Just Stop Hoyle. House of Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle has reiterated his apology for his handling of the Gaza ceasefire debate after last night's parliamentary chaos. I'll be speaking to one of the MPs who signed that motion of no confidence to Just Stop Hoyle. It's also emerged that civil servants are demanding a 4-day week for the same pay. And can you believe it? They all work from home anyway, don't they? And this comes as a new report reveals that staff working a 4-day week have shown health improvements. They want extra holiday pay on top. What planet are they on? And is it time to put Putin in his place? Because the Russian president has launched a war on British fishermen after Russia pulled out of a fishing deal. But fish and chip shop owners remain unbattered, insisting the UK trawlers don't fish there anyway, for God's sake. Is it time to knock Vlad off his perch? And that's all coming in your next hour. So that debate about Vladimir Putin coming for our fish suppers, that's at the top of this hour, at the end of the hour, beg your pardon. Before that, we'll speak to Miriam Case. She's one of the MPs who signed that no confidence motion against the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle. She wants to just stop Hoyle. I'll ask her why after this. Get in touch the usual way. Email gbviews@gbnews.com. Loads of emails about the anarchy on the streets last night. Is that affecting Parliament? Is this the thin end of mob rule? But first, it's time for your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom tonight is that the Prime Minister has now criticised the Commons Speaker's handling of the Gaza ceasefire vote yesterday, saying it was very concerning. More than 65 MPs have now declared no confidence in Sir Lindsay Hoyle, calling for him to resign. He has reiterated his apology for allowing both the government and Labour amendments to be debated. But Rishi Sunak says changing the usual way Parliament works is a very slippery slope.
The Speaker has apologised, is my understanding, for what happened last night, because the usual ways in which Parliament works were changed, and that is concerning. The Speaker said he's going to reflect on that. But the substance of this and the government's position is very clear. We want to see an immediate pause in what's happening in Gaza so that we can get more aid in and, crucially, get the hostages out, including the British hostages, and we can use that as a foundation to build a sustainable, lasting ceasefire. But that involves Hamas having no part to play in future governance of Gaza.
The Prime Minister speaking a short time ago. Well, Sir Keir Starmer says the Speaker did the right thing by selecting Labour's amendment in the debate yesterday, but he denies personally threatening him or influencing any decision.
I can categorically tell you that I did not threaten the Speaker in any way whatsoever. I simply urged him to ensure that we have the broadest possible debate.
And your MPs?
Broadest possible debate so that actually the most important thing, which is what do we do about the awful situation in Gaza, could be properly discussed by MPs with a number of options in front of them. That's the right thing to do. The Speaker did the right thing in making sure the debate was broad.
And looking at that early day motion of no confidence in the Speaker, I can tell you 67 MPs have now signed that early day motion. Well, the SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn told the Speaker his position is now untenable.
It's ultimately turned into a Labour opposition day. That, quite frankly, is not acceptable. And as I have expressed to you privately prior to proceedings here today, we do not, on these benches, therefore believe that you can continue.
Well, in other news today, the UK and Jordan have airdropped aid to a hospital in northern Gaza. Supplies include essential medicines, fuel and food for patients and staff, with the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, saying it'll help thousands of people. It's part of an agreement signed by the UK this week to deliver £1 million worth of aid to Gaza. The mother of the Putin critic Alexei Navalny says she's now seen her son's body, with his death certificate suggesting he died of natural causes. Navalny's family accused the Russian president of orchestrating his murder, something the Kremlin has denied. His mother has also accused Russian investigators of blackmailing her now over the funeral of her son. In a video published online, she said officials have threatened to do something with his body if she refuses a secret burial without mourners. Hundreds of victims of the Post Office Horizon IT scandal will have their names cleared under new legislation. The government says the law, set to come into force in July, will overturn the convictions of hundreds of wrongly accused sub-postmasters. Post Office Minister Kevin Hollinrake conceded some guilty individuals may also be exonerated, but said the unprecedented intervention will deliver long overdue justice. Households could see their energy bills fall to the lowest level in 2 years. The energy regulator Ofgem is due to announce the latest price cap tomorrow, with experts predicting it'll drop by £293 a year. That'd see the average household bill falling by 15%, from just over £1,900 to about £1,600 annually from the start of April. Police chiefs are calling for new powers to allow them to instantly disqualify drink or drug drivers at the roadside. Currently, drivers are only banned after being sentenced in court, but that can take weeks, during which time they can get back behind the wheel. The National Police Chiefs Council for Roads and Policing also wants tougher penalties for motorists who kill while under the influence, including potential murder charges. And employers could be sued if they don't make reasonable adjustments for menopausal women in the workplace. The Equalities Watchdog has issued guidance to companies to clarify their legal obligations. Symptoms of the menopause include hot flushes, brain fog and difficulty sleeping, which can be considered a disability under the 2010 Equality Act if it impacts a woman's ability to carry out usual day-to-day activities. For the very latest stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Polly. Now we've got a cracking hour coming up. Let's get stuck in, because as the number of MPs who have signed the letter of no confidence in Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle now exceeds 60, one Conservative MP has said the current chaos engulfing Parliament reminds him of the Brexit years, when the House of Commons just wasn't functioning. Meanwhile, as the SNP's Westminster leader, Stephen Flynn, confirms his party no longer has confidence in Sir Lindsay Hoyle, Sir Keir Starmer has also strenuously denied claims that he threatened Sir Lindsay to select his party's amendment in the Gaza ceasefire debate so he could avoid a large rebellion, saying he simply urged the Commons Speaker to have the broadest possible debate by putting a number of options in front of MPs. A day of calamity. And I'm now joined from Westminster Hall by GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Chris, thanks for joining us again. You said in the last hour 65 and rising, an astonishing 1 in 10 of all Conservatives. Has there been any upward movement on the campaign to just stop Hoyle?
Well, that's 1 in 10 of all MPs, not just Conservatives. That's Tories, Labour, Lib Dems, SNP and the rest. I can say the number is now 67. I've got friends of Lindsay Hoyle, Tory MPs, some who have signed this motion in regret, in sadness. They think it could hit 100 by next week, and it will be on the government. What will the government decide to do? Because any vote of no confidence in the House of Commons will be on government time. We heard earlier from Penny Mordaunt, she's the leader of the House of Commons. She made clear that the government at that point, lunchtime, was blaming Labour for putting pressure on Lindsay Hoyle's office. But whether that will hold, given the lukewarm support from the Prime Minister just recently in this clip just dropping. Earlier I spoke to Shailesh Vara. He's one of several MPs who stood against Sir Lindsay Hoyle. And I asked him how he felt Sir Lindsay Hoyle had behaved in this vote, and whether he felt that increasingly the pressure on MPs locally, the so-called mob as you describe it, Martin, is having a bearing on what MPs discuss here in the House of Commons.
I think we need to be very careful about how the House of Commons operates. We shouldn't be guided by influences outside that can impact on the proper functioning of Parliament. Parliament is supreme, it is independent, and the debates should be free-flowing. They shouldn't be skewed because of protests of one kind or another that are happening outside, because then people would suddenly say, OK, we know how we can manage the system. If we do this and that, then we can make sure that the Speaker will take this position rather than the other one. The reality of our politics is that the House of Commons debates freely and fairly, and that the Speaker is totally impartial. And I'm afraid what happened yesterday, whatever the reasons the Speaker may have, well-intentioned or otherwise, it did look as if it was helping out Labour from a very big hole and deep hole that they were in. There is a real threat that the mob may be having more of an influence in terms of the debate. They can certainly try to influence individuals in terms of the views they have, but they should not be dictating and influencing what actually happens in terms of the debates that we have. Those debates should be free and fair, and we should be having them in the greater good and the larger context, rather than in the context of being influenced by small groups.
That's Shailesh Vara there, Martin. He's an MP who stood against Sir Lindsay Hoyle to be the Speaker in 2019. And picking up on a point you've raised on your programme, that, and in fact raised also here on the channel by Sir Geoffrey Cox, the former Attorney General, earlier, that the problem that's happened here is Lindsay Hoyle has said he was worried about Labour MPs having no one to vote for. They couldn't express their opinion. They were left with voting for an SNP policy or a government policy, so he gave them that third option. But by doing that, and did it in regard to their own safety and recognising the pressure on them in their local parties, he's really allowed the mob, the groups outside, pressuring MPs to show that pressure has some fruit in the House of Commons, and that can't happen. And that's why Shailesh Vara was saying if he was Speaker, he wouldn't have bowed to that pressure from Labour.
Well, Chris Oak, thank you for that update live from Westminster. A lot of people feel today that the mob has already taken over. On that point, let's get the thoughts now of the Conservative MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge, Miriam Cates. Miriam, thank you so much for joining us on the show. So you are one of the 65 MPs and rising so far who has signed that no confidence motion in Sir Lindsay Hoyle. Why did you sign the motion to just stop Hoyle?
Well, good afternoon, Martin. I signed it with a very heavy heart, and I didn't sign it last night because I've got to be honest, it was too painful a prospect. I very much like Sir Lindsay Hoyle. I think he's been a brilliant speaker. He's a really nice man. He very much takes seriously the concerns of all members of Parliament. He's personally helped me with a number of security issues, so I bear him no ill will whatsoever. But I do think that the situation yesterday is bigger than about one man. It's about whether or not Parliament, whether or not the Speaker is being influenced unduly by threats, by pressure from outside. And unfortunately, the order of debate yesterday, the order of procedure absolutely was influenced by threats from outside. Now, I think we can all understand on a human level that Sir Lindsay Hoyle wants to protect the security of MPs. So does Sir Keir Starmer. Those are all admirable desires, of course. But the truth is that violent extremists, threats from violent extremists are putting so much pressure on MPs, particularly Labour MPs, that Sir Keir Starmer felt that he had to put pressure on Lindsay Hoyle in order for the votes to go his way. And that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable for our democracy. This is not about party politics at the end of the day. The MPs and the Speaker's first duty is to preserve our democracy. That is incredibly important. And yesterday, the integrity of our democracy was threatened, and I think it's very serious. And so I think we need to have confidence that a Speaker will not give in to that kind of pressure.
Miriam, I was outside Parliament yesterday. I was pelted with eggs. Fluid was thrown over me. I was abused. They were projecting images, pro-Palestine images, onto Elizabeth Tower, the Big Ben Tower. Police did absolutely nothing. They had absolutely no interest in stopping this. Signs were being held up saying, your grandchildren will know how you vote today. The threat from outside, from the mob, Miriam, is now so big, it seems to be poisoning what's going on in the chamber. How can we stamp this out?
You're absolutely right. And this is why Suella Braverman, when she was Home Secretary, called for those protests to be stopped, because they are enabling this radical extremism, this terrorist-supporting, anti-Jew sentiment on our streets that's enabling people to feel emboldened to target MPs, to target people in public life. And this has been going on for over 4 months. You know, it's become a stronger and stronger force on our streets. I know British Jews who won't go out in London anymore at the weekend, who feel like they need to leave the country. That's a terrifying prospect. And yesterday, from inside Parliament, it was very frightening. We were being told by the House authorities which entrances we couldn't use for our own security. And I spoke in that debate. I've got to admit, I thought twice about speaking in that debate because of my own safety and the safety of my family. I changed some of the words in that debate that I used because of those fears. And that's not right. You know, of course, MPs should be listening to the public. We should be listening to our constituents. But we should be speaking and voting on the basis of what we think is right, not on the basis of the violence that we fear might happen to us if we don't. But the problem is that we have to move forward from here. We can argue about how we've got to this position, whether or not the protest should have been stopped before now. But we are at this moment. We've got to recognise nationally that these extremist threats have got hold of our democracy, and now we need to work out together how we're going to clamp down on that. And I don't think that's about blaming any particular political party, but we've got to work together to recognise the threat to our democracy that we now face, and to look at how we're going to sort it out.
You're absolutely right to point out it's not just Conservatives. Of course, Mike Freer is standing away. There's murder of David Amos. Rachel Reeves has had abuse on the campaign trail. Sir Keir Starmer was harangued off a train in Scotland. Angela Rayner has had street-level abuse while out campaigning. The common factor is this growing Islamist sentiment, feeling that they're emboldened and they're marching through. Today, we saw that Prevent, our own anti-terror campaign, is too afraid to tackle this for fear of being called Islamophobic or fear of being called racist. Miriam, how do we grasp the nettle on this quickly? Because a lot of people are thinking that we're heading towards a thin end of anarchy.
I think the first step is for people to be bold enough to describe the threat, to speak it out, to say exactly what you've just said, to be honest about what's going on here. I think that's very important. But secondly, we do need the police now to crack down on what's happening on the streets. We cannot allow genocidal slogans. We cannot allow calls for jihad, for death to Jews, for the destruction of Israel to go unpunished on our streets. That's completely wrong. And I think what we need to re-establish is a sense of British democracy, British values, and that means a respect for Parliament, a respect for the rule of law, a respect for fairness and freedom. Those are the things that people in other countries look to our Parliament to uphold. But we've got to get control back of the streets, and I do think those protests need to stop now. I do think the police need to crack down very hard on any anti-Semitic, on any terrorist-supporting sympathies that are expressed on the streets. If it's got to the point where elected representatives are frightened of what they say in the chamber of the House of Commons, we know it's gone too far and it's got to stop.
Miriam, how can we do this? Because you keep giving the police new bills, but we don't have the will to do it. I saw last night multiple public order offences, men wearing masks, stuff being thrown around, anti-Semitic sentiment. The police are simply standing by and watching. They've been given more powers, but they don't have the will to do it. How can we empower them, aside from giving them new laws? How can we make them want to fight for the future of the country by getting tough at street level?
Well, perhaps I'm old-fashioned, but I think it's the elected government and elected parliament that should have power. Even the police, of course, we should have every respect for the police, but the government should be in charge of the police. And I think the Home Secretary should have the power to compel the police to prevent these marches. And of course, that is what we know the former Home Secretary was seeking to do, to stop the marches. And I think that's the first step. The Home Secretary should be able to compel the police to take particular action on this particular threat to our democracy. But then we need to follow up on William Shawcross's advice. You mentioned that he criticised the government's response to his Prevent review last year, that we have not implemented all the actions that he recommended. I think that's the next step. We've got to crack down on terrorist sympathisers. And don't forget, it's not just MPs that are under threat here. It's not just British Jews. It's the whole of British society, including British Muslims, who are under threat from a small number, but a very loud number of extremists who are now influencing our democracy wrongly. So, we owe it to everybody. The government owes it to everybody to take control of this, but stopping the marches and making sure that we follow through on those Prevent recommendations would be a good first step.
OK, excellent stuff. Miriam Cates, the Conservative MP for Penistone and Stockbridge, thanks very much for joining us on GB News this afternoon. Thank you very much. Now, Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle is fighting to save his political career as the SNP announced that he has no confidence in him as Speaker. And this comes as Sir Keir Starmer strenuously denies claims that he threatened Mr Speaker to select his party's amendment in the Gaza ceasefire debate.
I can categorically tell you that I did not threaten the Speaker in any way whatsoever. I simply urged him to ensure that we have the broadest possible debate.
And your MPs?
Broadest possible debate, so that actually the most important thing, which is what do we do about the awful situation in Gaza, could be properly discussed by MPs with a number of options in front of them. That's the right thing to do. The Speaker did the right thing in making sure the debate was broad.
Well, as I just discussed there with Miriam Cates, last night thousands of pro-Palestine protesters descended on Westminster to put pressure on MPs to support a suspension of fighting in Gaza, and I decided to go along and join them. Let's have a look at how it ended up. So that was me being pelted with 2 eggs by a pro-Palestine supporter, a young lady. We got all of it on camera. The police, as you saw, were there. The copper took 2 strides towards her and simply turned away. He had no interest whatsoever in pursuing her, which led me to believe, whose side are you on? This seemed to me evidence clearly of 2-tiered policing, and that wasn't the only thing that I saw. When I left work, I saw this. Images being projected onto Elizabeth Tower. That, of course, is the Tower of Big Ben. Pro-Palestine, ceasefire now, from the river to the sea. It also read images of bombs raining down, being projected onto that sacred building. Now, that is a public order offence. Parliament is not a billboard. You need a licence to do this, and if you don't apply for one, you can't do it. I know that. I told the police in attendance, when are you going to go and take control of the situation? And look what else I found. I walked over College Green and found the projector. There it is. A simple device about the size of a motorcycle battery strapped to a tripod on that fence, projecting, as you can see now, pan around right over onto that tower. I kept repeatedly saying to the police, it's over there, go and take it down. These images will shame us across the world. They have no interest whatsoever in doing it. I also saw multiple men in balaclavas, full ski masks. Recently, on February the 8th, the police were given beefed up powers, £1,000 fine, a month in clink for that offence. Again, I said to police officers, that guy's got a mask on. Go and nick him. They simply looked the other way. I was then pelted with water. I hope it was water. Who knows what they're throwing around these days with Abdul Azidi. I was egged twice, and the police classified that as an assault, but they didn't do anything. Why don't I show you another one of these videos?
Blah, 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 blah. Arrest him! Blah, 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 blah. There we go, he comes to brains of Britain. Blah, 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 he's got a full-face mascot. Blah, 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 blah.
As you can see, you get more sense out of a house brick or a cat. These people don't care about our opinions. They throw stuff at us, they pelt stuff at us, they're intimidating parliamentarians into how they vote. They're affecting our democracy from the streets. The mob seems to be in control. It's about time we took back control, if you ask me. Now you're watching or listening to GB News. Coming up, civil servants are demanding a 4-day working week. And get this, they want it for the same pay with some extra holiday on top. What planet are they on? I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, well, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:27. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, civil servants are demanding a 4-day working week for the same pay. The Public and Commercial Services Union, which represents over 200,000 civil servants, has asked for a significant shortening of hours without any salary charges. Great. Well, this comes as new research reveals that 86% of staff working a 4-day week say their performance improved at work. Well, Jack Kellum helped write the report on the UK's 4-day week pilot, and he joins me now. Welcome to the show, Jack. No surprises that people want to work less days for more pay and more holiday. But meanwhile, in the real world, how on earth can this boost performance?
So I think what we're seeing here with this demand from civil servants is by looking at evidence from trials that are happening in the UK and around the world that show shorter working hours lead to really important improvements in the well-being and productivity of workers. So it's good for not just good for workers, but good for business too. As you said, our study this week showed that of around 50 organisations who were trialling a 4-day week 2 years ago. Yeah, we followed up 12 months later from really successful results back in 2023. Almost all of them, about 90% of them, are still working a shorter working week. We've seen the benefits to well-being, to their productivity have been improved. And 100% of the managers and CEOs of those organisations say that the 4-day week is having an important impact on their business. So I think we're seeing here with civil servants is them looking at the evidence, right, and seeing that the 4-day working week really can work, not just for them, but for the organisation they work for as well.
In principle, great in the private sector perhaps, but we must remember the public sector is paid for by the taxpayer. Why should people watching this show today who have to work full-time, all the hours God sends just to make ends meet, pay the same wonga out so public servants can put their cogs up 1 day a week?
So the thing is, it isn't just in principle. We've got evidence mounting up, not just in the private sector, but in the public sector too. Back in 2021, we released research showing over in Iceland how their public sector, the local government there, had a really successful trial of shorter working hours. In the UK, just this week, we've seen South Cambridgeshire Council, who've been trialling a shorter working week for many of their council staff. I just said they just released some more results from there, from the success they're having. What it's really helped them do there is they've not just seen the performance standards being maintained, they've not just seen staff well-being improved, they've been able to fill roles they were finding it really, really hard to fill before. And previously, they were having to pay agency workers higher rates to fill these difficult roles. So now they're saving money by being able to employ people directly in the council. So, really, this isn't a matter of spending more money. It's actually be a really effective way of saving money in the public sector too.
I guess on the upside, Jack, a 4-day week might be more days than a lot of civil servants are actually working at the moment. I mean, we hear quite often of 3-day weeks being the norm, working from home. We don't know what people do at home. And surely if you're accountable to the taxpayer, we should know where you are and what you're doing. Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, was shamed when he went round Whitehall saying, get back to work, get back to your desk. But that's what the public, the overriding amount of public, that's what they want.
We've seen not just civil servants, but many other public sector organisations too, whether that's the health service, teachers. We know that burnout is a real issue. It doesn't affect just their well-being, it affects their productivity too and the services we're getting. So look, what's happening at the moment is we're seeing UK businesses, leading the way with really important innovation, which they've taken from global trends for the future of work. What we shouldn't have is the UK government, as they're currently doing with South Cambridgeshire, and currently by not really backing the 4-day week more publicly, we're seeing them standing in the way of a real innovation that British business is driving. What we should be doing is supporting businesses who are looking to new ways of working, see really effective results with it, rather than standing in their way all the time.
OK, Jack Benham, thanks for joining us. I suspect people watching this will think, well, my council tax is going up by 5% or more this year. I can't seem to get an appointment for anything. I can't seem to get anything done. Potholes are all over the shop. Why should we be paying civil servants 4 days a week, the same wonga? And is this a taste of the future to come under the Labour Party? We have to leave it there, but thanks for joining us. And there's loads more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, including the Russian president, as Vladimir Putin, has been put in his place by British chip shop owners after Russia pulled out of a fishing deal with the UK. I'll be speaking to a fish fryer who says he will remain unbattered, and plenty of other fish and chip related puns coming up. But first, your latest news headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Martin, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has criticised the Commons Speaker's handling of the Gaza ceasefire vote, saying it was very concerning. Sir Lindsay Hoyle has since reiterated his apology for allowing both the government and Labour amendments to be debated. He told MPs he had a duty of care, and if his mistake had been looking after members of the House, then he said he's guilty. More than 60 MPs have now signed a motion saying they have no confidence in the Speaker and they're calling for him to resign. The UK and Jordan have airdropped aid to a hospital in northern Gaza in a joint operation. Supplies include essential medicines, fuel and food for patients and staff. The Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron says it'll help thousands of people and is part of an agreement signed by the UK this week to deliver more than £1 million worth of aid to Gaza. The mother of the Putin critic Alexei Navalny says she's now seen her son's body and his death certificate suggests he died of natural causes. Navalny's family accused the Russian president of orchestrating his murder, something the Kremlin has denied. His mother has also accused Russian investigators of blackmailing her over the funeral of her son. In a video published online, she said officials had threatened to do something with his body if she refused a secret burial without mourners. And hundreds of victims of the Post Office IT scandal will have their names cleared under new legislation. The government says the law, set to come into force in July, will overturn convictions of wrongly accused sub-postmasters. Post Office Minister Kevin Hollinrake conceded some guilty individuals may also be exonerated, but said the unprecedented intervention will deliver long overdue justice. For the very latest stories, do sign up for GB News Alerts. Scan the QR code on the screen right now or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Shall we take a quick look at the markets? Well, the pound will buy you $1.2643 and €1.1692. The price of gold is £1,598.79 an ounce. And the FTSE 100 closed today at 7,684 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Thank you, Pauline. Great stuff. Now you're watching and listening to GB News. Plenty still to come in just a moment. Don't forget to send me your views. I'll begin to these at the end of the show. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email, so get those in ASAP. We've had loads about the protests last night, the calamity at Parliament. I'm Martin Daubney on GB News, Britain's News Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World. Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yep.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Absolutely. So speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Earlier on Breakfast. Pressure is mounting on the Speaker of the House of Commons to resign after proceedings yesterday descended into absolute chaos.
And I feel bad for him today because he's taking the blame and apologising for a situation that he couldn't have foreseen.
We're talking about women at the peak of their career, women with lots of experience who are then struggling with menopausal symptoms.
Honest to God, at this very moment in time, it's like the River Thames down my top. I am sweating so much. I'm 43 and it's embarrassing.
Every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Welcome back. It's 5:39. You're watching or listening to Martin Daubney on GB News. Now, a record 2.8 million Brits are not working because of long-term sickness. Well, according to the ONS, an astounding 560,000 16 to 34-year-olds say that they are too sick to work. And the Health Foundation, a charity who analyse these figures, says that the proportion of people not working due to mental health issues has almost doubled in just 11 years. Monthly personal independent payments are being dished out, as well as housing benefits and income support. So the question in this hour is this: is Britain on the brink of a crisis fueled by lazy Labour and driven by mental health? Well, joining me now to discuss this is the host of the Aussie Wire, Anna McGovern. Anna, welcome to the show. Now, mental health is a serious thing. Of course, I got involved in politics by campaigning on suicide reduction. But I put it to you, is the increase in young people in particular taking time off work due to using the mental health card? Is mental health the new bad bag?
I think to an extent I do agree with this, and like yourself, I actually also got into politics due to charity and fundraising and volunteering through that as well when I was a younger person. And I think that we are in the midst of a mental health crisis, and I think it's particularly hitting young people incredibly hard. I think we have such a huge reliance now on technology and social media platforms, and particularly for our, my generation, coming out of COVID lockdowns and all of those restrictions, I think we've developed such a large reliance on our phones that now we're coming out of these measures that we're so dependent on these social media platforms for all of our communications that I think it's actually having a huge impact on young people's mental health, particularly on TikTok when you have these mental health pages that you have some young people running where they talk about their depression and anxiety journeys. I think it's very easy for young people to now self-diagnose themselves of conditions they may not necessarily have. I do believe we are in a mental health crisis in this country, and we do need something to happen to support these young people and actually help them get on the job ladder and get them back to work.
Well, Anna, as well as TikTok and social media addiction, and of course Dr. Google, self-diagnosis, there's also the very real notion that people during lockdowns got used to the great giveaway, being paid to not work, and they got used to it. And actually now they've realised, well, what's the point getting out of bed in the morning when I get paid just as much to do nothing?
Yeah, no, I agree. And especially coming out of lockdown, one huge thing that we've seen is a lot more workplaces now implementing work from home measures. So when you'd normally go into the office every day to say hi to your colleagues, we now see so many more people actually working from their bedroom in front of a screen, completely isolated. So no wonder we have a mental health crisis in this country when we're no longer even communicating or talking to each other anymore. And I think that this is definitely something that we've seen, especially coming out of lockdown. We are so much more isolated as a nation when really we should be reaching out to each other more.
OK, superb stuff. Thanks for joining us on the show, Anna McGovern. And a statistic that leapt out of me in this report is this. A remarkable 280,000 young people in Britain, which is the population of Milton Keynes, now rely on some form of unemployment benefit. Now, I know the benefits network is there to help those who have fallen the most, but goodness me, that is an eye-watering number. Anna McGovern, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Now, time is running out on your chance to win £18,000 in cash, cold, hard cash, tax-free, in our latest Great British giveaway. And lines close this time tomorrow, Friday, so make sure you get your entry in sharpish. And here's how you could win that Wonga.
It's the final week to see how you could be the winner of the Great British Giveaway. There's an incredible £18,000 in cash to be won, totally tax-free cash that you can do whatever you like with. That works out to be an extra £1,500 to play with each month for a whole year. You could put it towards monthly treats, save it for a rainy day, or just use it to take the pressure off in 2024. But hurry, as lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. For another chance to win £18,000 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB02 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Good luck.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Lots of people very concerned about what's happening in the Middle East. Iran obviously denying it, but the next move from the United States, our key allies, will be absolutely key.
Absolutely right. And I think there's a lot of talk about where this could go, whether the situation could be escalated. But I think the chatter is heading in the right direction, which is about de-escalation. So if there are going to be targeted sanctions against Iran, that's already happened through expelling certain diplomats and other measures there. But you can do that without arm-to-arm combat at this stage. But I think the US will be weighing up all of its options. Antony Blinken obviously gave a press conference in the United States yesterday to say that, there will be a response from the US, but it'll be at their time and it'll be in the way in which they think is the most appropriate. So all eyes are now on the United States as to when it makes that move.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it, how domestic politics plays so much into international politics. The States, they've got a presidential election this year. We've got a budget coming up. So all the noise, both sides. You've got Donald Trump saying, go a bit more hawkish, I suppose you could say, than President Biden. And here we've got all the generals. We've got the Secretary of State for Defence coming out saying, we need conscription, we need more cash. But a lot of that is part of the sort of national narratives rather than actually looking at what's happening in Iran, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it plays into, the very uncertain times that we're living. And you're absolutely right. There'll be supporters of Donald Trump who are clearly adversaries of Joe Biden to say we must act now. It's a demonstration of showing your strength. Opponents of Biden will say that the US looks weak if it doesn't take action now against Iran, who are clearly, as we know, funding these at arm's length organisations like Hezbollah in Tehran, like the Houthis who are carrying out the attacks in the Red Sea. So Iran is responsible.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 5:47 now. Things couldn't get any better because Vladimir Putin has torn up fishing rights for UK trawlers that have existed for nearly 70 years. In what appears to be a revenge plot for the UK's response to the Ukraine war and the sanctions against Putin's top men. Now, the Russian president is deliberately targeting Britain's fish and chips. And it's no big secret that we hold our chippies very close to our hearts. Well, joining me now from the National Federation of Fish Fryers is Andrew Crook. And Andrew, can I just say again, I'm just delighted that the National Federation of Fish Fryers even exists. Godspeed to you. But look, as if it wasn't bad enough after Brexit, with the French, with the Dutch, with the Spanish getting their fingers on our fish. Now, bad Vlad is trying to take our fish and chips. What on earth is going on?
I think it's a little bit of sabre rattling from the Russians. Most of our fish comes from the Barents Sea, which is correct, but nobody fishes in the Russian area of the Barents Sea. That's where cod goes to grow, so it spawns it in Norwegian waters, heads to the Russian quarter, that's where it grows, and then migrates back, and that's when they catch it. That's why Russian vessels are still fishing in Norwegian waters. So it's a little bit of an empty threat. A lot of the fish that comes out of Russia goes via China and comes into processing factories in the UK without tariff. It's the direct imports that are affected by tariff. But we've got great relationships with Norwegians, with the Faroese, with the Icelanders. So there's plenty of fish about, and we've nothing to worry about.
Well, that's comforting to know, Andrew, as indeed that food on the screen now that's extremely comforting. I don't know about anybody else out there, but I'm drooling looking at that fish supper. I can always hear that batter crunch and that steam emerge like a pocket of delight. Anyway, sorry, Andrew, I was getting sidetracked there. The big question is, will this affect the price of a wedge of cod?
No, there'll be no effect at all from this. The supply chain, it still exists. I mean, America's started buying cod and haddock again, which may force the prices back up. They have eased a little bit in recent times, but other costs have gone up. So we're still under a little bit of pressure. But no, that won't affect it at all. But, you know, it's just great that it's nice that the Russians recognise it as an iconic dish. You know, and I hope our government do the same when it's the budget on the 6th of March, because it is so important that independent restaurants, especially fish and chips, you know, we do play an important role in the nation, and I hope that's recognised.
And Andrew, what would you like to see in terms of, you know, when the chips are on the table? What would you like to see from the government in terms of initiatives to help the fish and chip sector?
I think they definitely need to look at business rates for the larger businesses, but that benefits the national chains, the pub chains more than it benefits a business like my own. So I think VAT is the one thing in the tool chest that will help everybody. And that'll help drive the economy as well. And hopefully they do something for consumers, because obviously we need consumers to have money in their pocket. So it's not an easy task for the Chancellor, but I hope we figure in his thinking.
Now, Andrew, a show, a Martin Daubney show wouldn't be one without me mentioning Brexit. Now, our fishing deals are up for renegotiation soon, and that could mean a Labour Party government being in situ. Are you concerned that we might give away more of our fishing rights and row back and get closer to Brussels, and that might impact our fishing industry?
I think on the south coast, they are affected by the European fishermen. I think most of our fish comes from further north, so for fish and chips, we've got great relationships with Norwegians, Iceland, and obviously we've got some great domestic fishermen that bring in about 40,000 tonne of whitefish as well. So, no, I don't think we've got any problems going forward, but hopefully the Kirkella, which is UK registered long-distance vessel, gets a little bit more quota.
Superb. Nice positive end to the show there. Thank you very much, Andrew Crook. And again, I'm just delighted that the National Federation of Fish Fryers even exists. I don't know about you, but I know what I want for my supper tonight. Now then, we've had absolutely tons of emails come in today. I was asking you for your thoughts on the scenes outside Parliament last night. Of course, I went down there, I was pelted with eggs and fluids were thrown at me, pelted with abuse as well. The coppers, they had no interest whatsoever in arresting anybody, despite the fact they logged it as an assault against me. So they recorded the crime, but it did not pursue the person who did it, despite the fact it happened literally right in front of them. And you're very concerned about what feels like a descent towards mob rule. I want to read out a few of your emails now. May says this: We should be having a vote of no confidence in the Chief of Police in London. It's his force that are turning their backs on criminal acts in Parliament Square. He's absolutely no use. Terry adds this. Martin, I'm very shocked to hear you had fluid thrown at you, let alone eggs, and the police did absolutely nothing. Have the police learnt nothing over the last few weeks, considering the Abdul Azidi chemical attack? Terry, again, adds this. It's blatantly obvious now that the police have lost control of London's protesters. They defaced Big Ben with those images you can see on your screen there last night, and that is beyond belief. When the police refuse to act, this will only end one way. Edward adds this. Weak police is only encouraging the mob. It's time they clamp down or we will lose democracy altogether. Hunter adds this. The policing of the streets problem is mainly due to police being scared stiff of the demonstrators. I saw that with my own two eyes last night. In fact, I said right into the face of a copper, you're meant to police without fear or favour. I think you're showing fear towards the mob and you're policing with favour. What do you think would have happened if I'd have thrown an egg at one of them? What do you think would have happened to me if I'd resisted or if I'd retaliated? I think I'd be the one tasting prison food this morning. And Jane adds this. Martin, thanks for informing us, you and GB News, what is happening to our once great Britain. It feels as if we are being punished for being hospitable. And Rilla adds this. Thanks so much for your stance last night outside of Westminster, Martin. That took a lot of courage. Actually, I don't think it did. I was on my way home. I was just doing my job. And when a story breaks around me, it's my instinct to take those pictures and share it with you. Because we have to tell the truth. We can't just listen to the propaganda and switch off our ears and buckle down and watch this country wither away. She adds, the way you were treated was disgusting, pelted with eggs, verbal abuse and liquids. This country is gone to the dogs. It's a shame the police don't seem to be doing their jobs. Well, look, thanks for all those comments. And in fact, I'll be on Jacob Rees-Mogg's show tonight from 8 till 9 talking about this. But before that, it's the Michelle Jury Show, Jubes & Co. That's 6 till 7. And I'll be back here on the Martin Daubney Show 3 till 6 p.m. tomorrow for a nice happy Friday. But until then, have a fantastic evening. All the best.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie from the Met Office. There's further heavy rain to push eastwards through the rest of the day, but it will start to turn drier across the west over the next few hours. The heavy rains, as a result of this weather front that's been pushing eastwards through today, it's going to stall over the next few hours across the far southeast, but behind it it's turning colder and drier. So some further heavy rain to come in the east. We have got weather warnings still in force here, as well as wind warnings in the far southeast, but behind it will turn drier for many areas through tonight. So a much drier night to come, but it will be a colder night as we've got that colder air. So we could be down as low as -3 or 4 in the north tomorrow, as low as -1 in some rural areas further south. Frost will be fairly limited though, because we do have a fairly brisk westerly breeze through Friday. That's going to be pushing in showers from the west through the day. They'll be most frequent across western areas. Here they could merge into quite longer spells of rain, bringing a risk of hail and some thunder. The showers will drift into more eastern areas in the afternoon, but through the morning it should stay largely dry here. There'll be plenty of sunny spells as well. Temperatures much closer to average for the time of year across the UK. Showers should die down over Friday night slowly but surely to leave a much drier picture for Saturday morning, but there'll probably be quite a lot of fog around across central and eastern areas, but many areas should get away with some dry and sunny spells through Saturday, and it's looking like into the start of next week it should stay dry across the north with some rain arriving in the south. See you later.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Ken, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely on the large whole, even I wave the St. George's flag on a sporting occasion. And I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St. George's flag